evening and welcome to the St. Pete by Night Entertainment Network, where we play St. Petersburg by Night, a massive multiplayer 5th edition World of Darkness Chronicle set in the city of St. Petersburg, Florida. My name is Kent, also known as Kent on all social media, and I am the lead storyteller of St. Pete by Night. But tonight, I play the role of host because this is After Dark, our behind-the-scenes program, where we talk to some of the movers and shakers in the world of darkness, including storytellers and players and writers and authors and creators and all of the people who make the world of darkness as amazing and wonderful and colorful and creative and cool and amazing as it is. And tonight, I am so pleased to say I have 4 really incredible guests, and it's the first time in a very, very long time I have had a jam-packed, and I mean jam-packed, I mean look at all these amazing faces over here that I have on the screen. I mean, it is a very, very full screen, as you can see right now. A jam-packed show for you today because I have several of the participants of the City of Glass LARP, the City of Glass Games community on the screen with me today, and I'm so happy to have them here. So before we get to introducing these incredible individuals, I just want to encourage you all to go follow St. Pete by Night on all of those amazing social medias that you see up above there at the top of the screen and down in the description. We would really love your support. And if you are enjoying the content that you have been seeing on this lovely channel, you should come join our community, because we have over 200 plus amazing community members that make our community possible, and tons of incredible activities that you too could be a part of if you just come sign up. So follow that incredible Discord link and hop on over to the St. Pete by Night community and join us, where you could be a part of the fun and a part of our St. Pete by Night family. But enough of me. You've heard enough of my jabbering, jawing 3 times a week for most of the past 3 years. Let's get to introducing our incredible guests. Take it away, guests. Introduce yourselves, if you please.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Arden13. I am the one of the storytellers on the storyteller staff here for City of Glass Games, and my particular expertise comes in with our friendly neighborhood kindred.
Hey, I'm Collin. I'm the narrative director for City of Glass Games and the head storyteller for the City of Glass LARP. Started off with speciality changelings, but have kind of generally moved to a lot of the plots in general, helping out a lot with the traditionalist mages this year and the changeling plots.
I'm Erik. I am the events director for City of Glass Games and an event organizer and organized play manager for Gehenna Gaming as well. I am primarily the shifter storyteller at City of Glass Games, but I started off as a mage storyteller. And you can occasionally find me at Blank Bodies voicing a very cursed man who loves milk by the name of Louis Pasteur.
Hi there, I am Brent, also known as Ouroboros Online. I am a participant. I'm a lowly player that somehow got sucked into this vortex of fun and excitement for tonight. And so I guess I'm here to give you the boots on the ground perspective. I also am a contributor to the Blank Bodies podcast for occasional random clan voices, and I also do some BattleTech content. So if you like giant stompy robots, I have a podcast for you.
Well, on top of that, I would also say Brent is a professional storyteller as well. So you can find Brent over on Start Playing Games, which I'm sure he will promote at the end of this particular stream tonight, because we love Brent and he is a member of our community and we want to see him do well in the long run of things. So we'll get to that later. But Gentlemen, first off,
Too kind.
welcome to After Dark. We are so happy that you're here, and I'm so excited to get into this conversation tonight because I have been playing World of Darkness for over 25 plus years, and I have been LARPing for a good majority of those years as well. So I'm so excited to hear about how you got into all this, how this all started. But let's begin at the very beginning because as storytellers, we all know stories begin at the beginning. And let's start with your beginnings. How did you first discover TTRPGs as a whole? How did you first hear about them? Did you have any preconceived notions about them before you actually, decided to take the leap in? Because, I know some people might have thought Satanic Panic, if you're as dated as I am, or may have thought it's nerdy, or have thought, that's what, kids dress up and do in their parents' basements, or whatever the case may be. Did you have any preconceived notions, or were you sucked in immediately? What was the case? Arden, let's start with you.
Sure. Preconceived notions, unfortunately, was just not in my vocabulary at the time. I think for a lot of us, Dungeons and Dragons at some point or another was a huge gateway for us, and I am no different. I think the two instances that I can really speak to, my introduction was very, I don't want to say confused, but I wasn't aware. And of course, when I was 7, so how was I supposed to parse through any of this, 30 plus years of content? But at a local Goodwill, like a thrift store, I found this box game set of third edition D&D, and I bought it for $2. And I used that and I started playing with a couple of my friends who lived on the same street as me. And then I think maybe a couple months later, I walked into a local half-price books, and there was a 4th edition player's handbook with a big dragonborn on it, and I was like, "That's the one. That's what I want." And that's what started me. So of course, I had 4th edition rules and 3rd edition other content. It was a mix. It was a mad bag.
And how about
But
you,
that's-
Collin?
Oh man. So I before TTRPG even hit into the mix, I was a super imaginative kid, just making up a lot of stories just off my street and stuff like that. I got pulled in high school by some theater kids. I ended up picking up this monologue from a book of monologues, a Richard III monologue, without even knowing that it was Shakespeare. At the time, and just threw myself into it. And some kids were like, "Oh, all right, so you seem all right." So they grabbed me, adopted me into this group, and brought me into D&D, and that ended up being my play group for pretty much my entire high school career, and that kind of ended up bringing it. So it was D&D mostly throughout the entirety of high school. And then I only really got into World of Darkness when I hit college. And that was New World.
Okay, all right. Erik.
So I was first not going to anecdote, but then Collin mentioned how he was a super imaginative kid. And just for the sake of it, my first time storytelling was when I was about 4 years old. And if anyone remembers the Babar the Elephant TV show, that was my first foray into storytelling, where I would stand on a little soapbox and then present Babar to my family. It was cute, but now I know as an adult, it's very terrifying. Anyway, so when I was in about 13 years old, it's funny you mentioned the whole playing in your parents' basement type of deal. My friend Jesse, he invited us over one night for a sleepover for his birthday party, and of course we were playing D&D 3.5. So that was how I got started into the foray of TTRPGs, and then we just play there about once a week for about 8 hours a given night. Crazy times back then. Back when you could just walk outside, right? And then getting older, I fell out of D&D for a long while. I have TTRPGs for a long while. Then in college, kind of came back into it. Eventually met one of our mutual friends and co-storytellers, Ryan, through Humans vs. Zombies at Penn State University when they came for an invitational. And then got invited to GenCon, and on night 3 of year 3 of the Vancouver LARP, I decided, what the hell? Why don't I just play a thing? And of course, I chose Mage as my first thing. And since then, I've been storytelling now for 5 years, basically since the pandemic. So, ayo.
Because if you're going to get into World of Darkness, you might as well dive into the deep end and almost
deepest
drown
part
right
of it,
away. Yeah, of
Look,
course.
like the first thing is like, okay, here you could play a mage. Okay, cool. Like it has a class type of deal, and then the word paradigm is mentioned to you, and you just watch your eyes just like gloss
Just
over.
completely.
I like how we're just getting like the deep lore. Even I didn't know this until like right now. This is great.
Well, that's okay. I discovered, D&D through Thaco, so I feel you. So it's totally fine. Brent, how about you?
Well, I never really got a chance to sink my teeth into tabletop RPGs up until a couple years ago. Like I did a couple D&D games with people that, did 6 to 8 sessions and then kind of petered out because they died to the eternal BBEG, which is scheduling conflicts. And and then life, adulting, working, going to school. So it was always kind of on the back burner, but I've always been a big lore hound, and so interesting stuff. And the pandemic hit, and so suddenly we had some more free time. And well, one of the community members for my podcast was just like, "Hey, you like this thing because I started watching Not a Drop to Drink, which is a actual play that Loading Ready Run has done, which is really good, and I highly recommend people check it out because it's actually a story told by Jacob Burgess, who is a creator for or credited writer for Cult of the Blood Gods, and I was just like, oh, this is cool. I've always liked vampires. Let me just have a little taste. Like, rum, 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 rum. Yeah. And just like completely fell down the World of Darkness hole. Was introduced to the Blank Bodies crew, who are great people and another great community. And then through them, I started going to GenCon, and they were like, "You should try LARP," and I'm like, "Absolutely, why not? New experiences." And got handed basically a character on year 3 of their NOLA story, and was just like, "Here, have fun with this." And
I'm so
I
sorry.
no, I had a great time. It was, as far as a first experience, it was great. I don't regret anything. I had a really good time. In fact, I heard afterwards, someone went up to one of our mutual friends. It was just like, "How long has Brent been doing this? He's really good at this." And they were just like, "This is his first at LARP," and they're like, "What?"
Well,
Sorry, what?
that's amazing though. It's great to get a group together like this because it is such a variety of experiences. But what I'm really happy, especially about this particular group, is most of the people I've talked to discovered gaming because of the pandemic. And with this particular group, most of you discovered gaming before the pandemic. And that makes me so happy. And don't get me wrong, the pandemic did wonders for the TTRPG community. I don't think we would be doing nearly as well as we are as a society, as a gaming society, as we are now, if it wasn't for the panini, as some of us like to call it, to make it, not as tragic as it was. But it's a wonderful thing to talk to people who has been a lifelong hobby for a lot of us, or at least for 30 years. And so I want to ask, when did World of Darkness really come into your lexicon, and what was it about World of Darkness that hooked you? Because for a lot of people, they want the fantasy, they want the escape, and World of Darkness is not as much of an escape, because World of Darkness really calls upon a lot of really thematic elements that are tied to a lot of the elements of our real world. They're tied to a lot of the darker corners of our real world. Not so much major changeling, let's be real, but vampire and werewolf, and I mean mage and changeling do have their parts. I'm teasing when I say that, but like they do tap into some of the more darker elements of our real world, to the point that it does push some people to their limits. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, especially when we get into talking about LARPs and some of the dangers of LARPing. But what was it about World of Darkness that really hooked you and brought you in when there are other alternatives, especially in the LARPing community, that could take you away? Like, there's GURPS and there's all these other LARPs that could, take you other places, fantasy LARPs. What is it about World of Darkness that called you Arden?
So I suppose I forewarned these guys that I got to tell a particular story. One of my favorite stories, just from my experience as a TTRPG player, storyteller, just being in the space, is how I got introduced to World of Darkness, and it involves I don't know where he is on your screen, but on mine he's right here. It's Collin. It's this guy right here. So how this went, because Collin and I live in the same city. We live in the same town. Have our pretty much our entire lives, but never like crossed paths up until this fateful moment. I had been running a D&D campaign for it has actually hit a decade at this point. 2025 hits the decade point for it. And I've had a number of players. I had one critically problematic player whom I refer to as the Wolf Boy, and I was standing out in front of a local Japanese restaurant. They very small. They do like udon dishes and stuff like that. Regaling one of my contemporaries about this whole situation, this maddening situation about this player who really wanted to be a werewolf in Dungeons and Dragons Third Edition, and like all of the crazy things that he got up to. And as we're standing outside the restaurant waiting for a table, Collin walks up and goes in, gets himself gets on the registry, to get a table or what have you, and then comes back outside and is just standing there. But like I see him out of the corner of my eye, kind of like turning towards me every so often, because I get very boisterous, I get very loud. And then finally, he eventually, I don't know, he got fed up with waiting, and or I don't know what really went through his head, but he kind of just leaned over and said, "You guys talking about werewolves?" Um, and we ended up having dinner together that night. And he introduced me to the World of Darkness. Later on, he invited me to the City of Glass LARP. At the time, they were in their starting up their San Francisco Chronicle. And it's in terms of the things that really draw me to World of Darkness. Sure, there's levels of escapism that maybe are lacking because it is grounded in our reality, but it's still some of those more personal stories, those very grounded stories, because it grounded in a lot of our reality that you get to explore as a player and as a storyteller, that really draws me to it. Sometimes you kind of have to pull a few more things for that when you're, say, when you're running a D&D game, more or a fantasy or more of a sci-fi game. But like if it's already grounded there, it's a lot easier, it seems, sometimes to kind of pull on those strings for players and create those stories.
Absolutely. Collin.
So, urban supernatural kind of as a genre was always sort of a big draw for me, just because I love mythology, sort of in general, cryptids and other stories like that sort of follow a lot of our culture, just from place to place. The stories that we tell within our modern scope, and that influences like our culture right now, very specifically. So I played a lot of D&D through school within like the fantasy. So it was a lot of fantasy. I love telling all kinds of different stories. And World of Darkness kind of gave me an opportunity to break into another genre. And I was really not a huge fan of D20 Modern. I did not like that. I did not like how they presented that setting. So World of Darkness was a really big like breath of fresh air, and I felt like it got into some more like nitty gritty of things. It abstracted combat in such a way that emphasized a more narrative element to adjudicating conflict. That really kind of, it didn't emphasize getting like very granular with some of the say like the strategy of like grids and such like that, and more of like the narrative retelling, which really emphasized kind of the storytelling that I really enjoyed telling. So I kind of switched pretty hard into World of Darkness, and that was New World at the time. I didn't come back around into Old World until pretty much later on, and with like a lot of the rich tapestry of kind of the crazy history that they've got in there. And since the Old World kind of ended in toward the end of like the 90s and everything like that, when they sort of switched over, and it wasn't until more recently they switched into V5 and then sort of back ended their history note, but there wasn't anything at that time. It was sort of just kind of left open ended. Figuring out, okay, what parts do we want to keep, what parts do we not want to keep, which lore is relevant and which lore nobody had time to read everything. Which lore are we keeping that is familiar to those that are, like old world heads that are coming in that really love the lore and would be familiar with things that are coming on. Exactly. And then like which stuff, but we don't want to use all of it because that can be very straining. We don't have time to read literally mountains and mountains and mountains of book with a lot of lore. Some of it
some of it's problematic too, like
some of it's extremely problematic. We don't really want to keep it anyways, and but keep enough of the familiarity that those that are familiar with it are like, oh, I know this, and oh, you're making a reference, a callback to this, and I know this out of character. That makes me excited. But then also dealing with the metaphysics of wrapping these games kind of into each other, some of them leaving extreme interpretive levels of sort of like, well, this is how werewolf works, this is how vampire works, this is how mage works, and there isn't one unified example of how like the metaphysics specifically kind of works. Everybody sort of like argues over that, and you're kind of left to, as a storyteller, figure out what is the unified idea of how everything is supposed to work in the behind the skein of like the world itself, because it can work in a lot of different ways and how everything interacts. And I really like adding that level of that detail behind the scene, because how is everything supposed to work if I don't know how it works, if my storytellers don't know how it works, how these interactions are supposed to fit together. So we have recorded hours of me ranting about like the truths and the metaphysics of our universe and like how these things interact and what is going on. Like, this doesn't go out to the players, they don't know this stuff, but we know this stuff so that you guys know how to like adjudicate certain things when they come up, basically. But like that's what I really like getting into.
Well, you made a really interesting point, and I wanted to kind of go back to this, which was the mechanics is one of the things that caught you and brought you into the system and into the game. And that was one of the things that hooked me at first too, because I was not a fan of horror. And I still to this day am not a fan of horror, which surprises people because I've been running and playing World of Darkness for almost 3 decades now. But I don't watch horror movies. I do not go to horror movies. I do not like horror. I don't like haunted houses. Like, it's not my thing. But it's a huge part of this thing. But I love the mechanics of World of Darkness because it's not super crunchy. It's very narrative like minded, and I love the way it works because like the D20 system and coming from D&D, AD&D, and all these other very crunchy systems, when I discovered World of Darkness and the D10 system, very simple, very streamlined, very like very straightforward, where I could let the story do the telling and let the mechanics just kind of be a side thing that helped bring chance into it, but didn't require a lot of focus and a lot of attention. Like,
absolutely.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that's not been a big thing for people when they talk about it. A lot of the guests I've talked to very few of them mention the mechanics. A lot of them say, I loved horror growing up, or, whatever the meaning is. But that you said that means so much to me, because that was what hooked me, was the mechanics first. And then I came to love the setting and the history and all the other stuff that you mentioned. But it was the mechanics first. So I'm so glad you said that, because that was the same.
100%. It's a beautiful vehicle for that. Real quick, Arden and Arden, we are in I run another game where I've just taken the structure of World of Darkness. I've made a space opera a la like Firefly-esque game, where I've just taken the mechanics of the game itself and I homebrew everything else. I've done it with a superhero-based thing well. It's just because I know the system that well. It's easy to write up with the mechanics.
Yeah,
the system adjudicates itself really well, lends itself to excellent poppy combat. That is great for just describing really excellent narrative moments. You're in, you're out. And then you focus entirely more on just like the high points, I feel like, in the storytelling, which is the description, the narration, the dialogue, and the development, which is just really like the bread and butter of what I'm looking for in a role play system personally.
Absolutely.
And that's just what I like.
Yeah, I'll take like a mortal sheet, or I'll take a Dark Ages sheet and just take out the discipline section, or and I'll just run like a D&D game with just the mortal section and just do it that way. And it's so much more fun than bringing in all the complicated, crunchy mechanics of those other games. That's my personal preference. Like, I know some people love the crunchiness of those other systems, and that's fine. But I have always been a narrative-based person, and I'm like, again, I'm so glad that you said that. I've been waiting for someone to say that, and this is just brain exploding for me. So happy to hear you say that. But let's go to Erik and hear what Erik has to say about how World of Darkness hooked him. Erik, go ahead.
First off, I just want to let everyone know you've got like the first glimpse of what it's like to have a storyteller meeting with Collin, whereby we will ask a simple question and then we will get a half-hour response. He jokingly mentioned, but not really, about how we have a literal, we have 2 or 3 audio files that were taken in October of 2020, where we literally got the metaphysical download of all the things that exist within our world of Darkness in our setting, and then what that means for the broader setting as a whole, and how that all cross and interacts. Because we're one of the very few games that does a full cross splat without oppressing changelings and without having mages just destroy everything by conjuring the sun. So, anyway, what got me into World of Darkness? It's a far different story than anyone. As you can see, Collin's dying right now as the dynamic camera tries its best to follow him. What got me into World of Darkness is a much different story. It's a much simpler story. At GenCon 2015, this was when Critical Role started getting big, and they put on their first live show at the theater, at the Circle Theater. That's right there in like the Circle of Indianapolis next to the World War II monument. And that was on the Friday. And I was only coming to Gen Con for one thing, which is that. Saw the show, and when I came back from the show, I was staying with friends of our community and players on our LARP, Devin, Ryan, Zach, and a couple of other people. And I overheard them talking about like this game that they were playing, this LARP. And like my only scope and reference of LARP were 2 things before that, which is Boffer, which this wasn't, obviously, unless you're playing a much different game than most, and Humans versus Zombies, which is played with like Nerf guns and stuff. And I heard them telling the story about how they were running across a field and like firing guns at each other and all this other stuff that was going on. And I was like, what are you guys talking about? Oh, this is World of Darkness. What is that? And they were like telling me about what it was without telling me a single thing about actually what it was. It's like a movie trailer, right? We're going to give you the plot of what we did without telling you a single thing of what it was. And so I was like, is it okay if I join you guys for this night? Like, it's the last night at Gen Con. I don't know if yeah, sure, come along, like, come by. I show up. I know nothing about the system. Absolutely nothing. And John and Ryan are preaching to me mage. So I go, okay, I have the idea of like a spellcaster from World of Darkness. Hey, we're all mage storytellers except for you, Arden. And we're preaching.
Proud of it.
Sorry, not preaching.
Mage first. Jeez.
I have the reason for it. It's because I stay with John Lux and with Ryan. That's why.
Oh my god.
And they were giving me this idea of like, oh, you can cast and like do all these different things. You have these spheres that can help you manipulate the world. We have some pre-made character sheets to help you along. I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. Like, I know D&D, I know spellcasting from those. I know it's a thing within like general nerdy spaces. And I'm like, okay, sure, I get it, I get it. They hand me the sheet, and I look at it, and it looks like it's a totally different language. And they're trying to explain to me the course of paradigm, of spheres, of the different traditions. I was playing a chorister, which thank God that was like one of the easiest ones to understand for a new player. But then we hit scene on. And in that first scene, we literally had an Nefandi like preach to the entire LARP, like his entire grand plan for the city, played by Devin. The character is Jimmy Jonas. And then we broke off into all these scenes. I was lost. I didn't know where to go. I only had like a couple of friends, but my friends are in scenes. I wound up talking to the other co-founder of City Glass Games, Troy, and he just like drags me to a scene with the big bad that was just announced a second ago. And from there, I was just lost. It was all lost in a good way. Like I was in the rabbit hole in a big way. The narrative drew me in of what the story was, how it worked mechanically. Like I had never heard of a rock paper scissors LARP before, and honestly, it sounds so simple, and it is, but it's also one of the most anxiety and adrenaline inducing moments you could ever have when literally someone goes, throw me a chop, and you're facing like down to life or death situation. You have no idea how it's going to shake, and it's just a 1 in 3 chance, right?
Can
And
confirm.
Rock, paper,
you
scissors in a
have
tree.
no idea what's in store for you yet.
What about the bomb?
Shh, 1 in 3. 1 in 3. We don't talk about that one.
We don't talk about the bomb.
And from there, that was the end of one of our first chronicles, which is Vancouver. Which at GenCon there was one other major LARP organization that is no longer around called Darkness Remembered, and we were like competing against them back in time. I didn't know that, and eventually we break into our next chronicle, which is San Fran, and then I stepped up to be a storyteller in New Orleans, which was our most recent chronicle that wasn't the one we did last year. And the reason why I did that was because I jumped in due to pandemic and we had staffing shortages. Imagine what the pandemic does for your mental, right? And from there, I just took on mage storytelling. We'll get into a little bit about the weeds of that probably later on in this interview, about some of the plot pitches that we definitely couldn't do, both for Collin's sanity and the rest of the LARP's sake. And from there, getting involved in World of Darkness, I then started to get involved with some of the 5th ed rules. I love Hunter. I love Werewolf. Started getting involved with some other communities that were running these things at conventions like Gehenna Gaming. And I've just not looked back. Now I organize, and I've got like 240 events slated for GenCon just alone across LARPs, TTRPG events, actual plays, panels, seminars, you name it. So, sorry, long answer, short form. 2015, I decided to just take the leap for $12. It was worth it.
Absolutely. Brent, how about you?
Well, I've always kind of been aware of World of Darkness, like someone who is geek or nerd coded, you even if you don't do the tabletop RPGs, you're aware of Dungeons and Dragons, and there's the other stuff, and just there's that World of Darkness which the edgy people all play, way back in the day. Yeah. And like I said, I've always kind of been into vampires just as the concept. I'm like, that's a cool monster. And then once I was able to get my hands on some of the books and start getting into it, it was kind of like a 1-2 punch, because I started with vampire, and I love all the other ones, but like vampire's what I know the best, and I think it is really what wrapped me in and was just like, we're not letting go. The mechanics are quick, fluid, especially V5. Like V5, the mechanics updates that they've done are just chef's kiss. Because my D&D experience was that you do the session, you get around the table with your friends, you do some role play, you go to the shop, you talk to the people, you figure out what you're going to do, and then you're going to go and you enter the dungeon, and then combat starts, and everything grinds to a halt where people min-max and the combat takes forever. And admittedly, this is my experience. It's not everybody's lived experience, but the role play just stopped as soon as combat started. and that wasn't really what I was looking for. You know, it was fine. I'm not saying it was a bad time, but it didn't, you know, keep me engaged the way you want to be engaged around the table. Whereas World of Darkness, it's a lot, especially with the like 3 and done or 5 and done. Combat is a lot more punchy, it's quicker. It also makes sense that, you know, not everybody, I will fight to the death because of principles. And, you know, like people are like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm out. No, I don't want to die. You know?
Principles?
Yeah.
Fair escape, fair escape.
Fair escape, fair escape.
Yeah. And then the other thing that the other punch that really, you know, got me was the fact that it is so grounded, and it gives people a lens or just enough distance or a reflection to talk about real world stuff in a way that doesn't make it feel personal or an attack. It gives you a dark reflection of the real world we live in, and so we can look at things and go, "Oh yeah, that is a little messed up, isn't it? Huh? Maybe we should. That's a thing. I'm learning about the world I actually live in through playing this fun game." And this is also why people think that I'm Brujah coded.
So the concept of TTRPGing and role playing is something that we can all kind of call back to our youth on, in the fact that it is playing pretend, right? Like the idea of role playing is the basic concept of playing pretend. It's something that we can all tap into. Now, when the idea of TTRPGs came into our sphere, our atmosphere, it required rules. It required learning all these mechanics and sitting down at a table and dice and filling out sheets and everything, and it got a little more complicated. What I want to know is the transition from going from the table to LARP. When did LARPs enter into your life? When did you first discover LARPs? What was your first LARP experience like? Because we are talking primarily about LARPs here. You know, I would talk more about your first table experience, but I want to really focus on the LARP experience here. When did you first hear about LARPs? What was your first conception about LARPs? You know, were you like, okay, I'm not going to get into that? Or did it really appeal to you at first, the idea of it? And what was your first experience like? Arden, let's start with you.
In as much as I would love to, I've actually personally never done like a boffer LARP. I have some martial combat training, some martial arts training as well from when I was younger as well. And so like the idea of like jumping in, you know, fully teched out for like a boffer LARP kind of setting sounds like amazing for me. I've never done it. I've never been able to do it. I've been never found the time.
I have.
But
It's expensive and exhausting.
I know. But in terms of like these parlor LARPs, parlor style LARPs that I would attribute more to the World of Darkness. I've done pretty much all of my LARPing with COGG. I started out as a player at the beginning of San Francisco. And how that kind of, I already kind of told you how I got in contact with Collin, and how like that just steamrolled very quickly into being involved in the LARP. My first experience is actually very not too dissimilar from Erik's, where I had, you know, sat down at the table. Collin's talking to me about, you know, World of Darkness and vampires and stuff like that. And at the time, my like real context for vampires was, I think at the time, well, yeah, like the Underworld movies and the Twilight movies. And then, you know, a smattering of other things, Hugh Jackman's Van Helsing and other things. So like the idea of like the clans and the Camarilla versus the Anarchs versus the Sabbat was really interesting to me. I settled with a character, and I assume we're going to talk about our favorite clans or whatever later on, but I settled with a character for year one of San Francisco. Was kind of given the idea of like, this is how you do chops and you adjudicate stuff like that, you know, with the Rochambeau and the bomb that we don't talk about. But aside from that, the bidding of traits, and like other like finer nuances, like the fundamental stuff. I had no idea. I had no idea how any of that worked. So for the first 3 sessions at that first Gen Con that I jumped into the game, I had no idea how any of my powers worked. I didn't use any of my powers. I didn't spend blood. I didn't spend willpower because I didn't know how. I just, well, I'm kind of a little, I can be an extrovert here and there. So I'm just going to talk to people. I know what my plot is and what I'm going to try to do. I was playing an infernalist, and what like my top goal for the weekend was get more people to join the demon cult. And I was like, I can do that. And then by the end of the third night or whatever, I had like 6 or 7 of the 15 vampires like sworn to the demon cult just by like shaking hands and like talking to people. And it was afterwards that I realized, oh, I have to play rock, paper, scissors in order to dominate somebody. This would have been so much easier.
Collin, how about you?
Yeah, so I was like aware of LARP within the periphery in high school. So the first LARP that I joined was at GenCon. It was a Darkness Remembered LARP, and City of Glass Games was sort of like calved off of Darkness Remembered. Our co-founder started the first City of Glass games off of a Darkness Remembered game, because the original Darkness Remembered formula was that every year for Gen Con they would have a mixed splat supernatural kind of like World of Darkness game, but they would kind of go into some like zany scenario, bunch of kind of like overpowered characters or whatever, because the idea of it was that it was a 3-night LARP, in, out. The storyline started and ended with those 3 nights. There's no continuum, there's nothing. So like it was always some kind of weird scenario, weird, like crazy, the characters that were gathered for this kind of a thing, because it was literally just flash in the pan. So I joined one of those games where everybody had been, I think, just like drawn to a small town and then trapped by an impenetrable wall of mist that was actually an angel's body or something like that. It was wild. I believe I believe Devin, who was mentioned sometime earlier, was killed by a loon, one of those like werewolf spirits, just killed by a duck. I mean, a very powerful duck, but a duck. So lots of crazy stuff happens in those games, but the why I joined the LARP is kind of the reason that I stuck with it and continue to stick with like the community here and build with it is like the genesis seed of like why I love this community and everything. It's the like when people kind of ask like what's like the mission statement around it, it's all about the whole thing. At Gen Con, I get a lot of friends. During the day I would bounce between groups, going from like sometimes little pickup games or wandering the exhibit halls, but in the evening everyone would kind of split off and do their own thing, and it was hard to coordinate with people, so I would often just sort of wander around the halls like feeling sort of disconnected and like a little bit lonely. I'm also like very extroverted, and it would be hard to try to choose between which groups of friends I was going to go with and like what was going to be happening. If I signed in with this group, well, that was going to be the whole evening, and then I'd miss out with all of these other folks. And this is like the one time that like everybody was together, and it was so hard to coordinate seeing everybody. And this LARP opportunity, it was a possibility to gather as many of my friends as possible into one event that I was going to be able to interact with them at the same time in a thing that we were all doing together and all collaboratively building a story together. It just seemed like the best of so many different worlds together, that I was like, oh, this is like a solidly cool idea. And everybody likes like game stuff like World of Darkness and stuff. So I just started to like gather folks and gather folks. And I was just playing it first. And then eventually moved my way into the staff and just started recruiting people and community wise. That's just, it came out of an idea of gathering as many like-minded, cool, interesting people and creating like a community where we could all come together in the evenings at Gen Con, where we could see folks that come from as far as out of country sometimes and be in one place night after night, seeing each other collaboratively building interesting, evocative stories together, and like having that opportunity to like hang out and take a break here and there and like catch up and stuff like that. It just, that was the appeal to me, to get involved. I've actually never joined another LARP outside of Gen Con, weirdly enough.
Okay.
I just hadn't had time.
No, that's fair.
And
That's
anything
fair.
else. So
Well,
it started with Gen Con and continued with Gen Con.
when you find something that works too, it's like, why find something else? Because I found that in my experiences as well, is like I've joined a LARP and I've had like perfect experiences, and then I go to other things and I can't find that same hit. I can't recapture the magic. And even at the same LARP, I can't recapture the magic. You can't recapture those glory days. Because there was a Boffer LARP I actually went to for over a decade. And those first couple of years were amazing. But then I, left for a couple of years and I came back and it just wasn't the same. And it's one of those things, it's like you can't recapture the magic of the old days. And you go to other LARPs and you try other things and it's just not the same. So if you find something that works, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I totally understand that, not straying outside of that, because you don't want to ruin that perfect vision of what you have. So I get that. Erik, how about you?
So for me, LARP began in like the vernacular for me. Actually in about my junior year of high school. So this is going back now, 2007. And oddly enough, you were talking about expensive hobbies, right? Our first foray to what LARPing was, I didn't know what LARP was at the time. Again, same friend Jesse. We were looking to join the SCA for Pensick. The huge medieval. Yeah, talking about buying your 10 and 12 gauge steel for everything, your rattan weapons, all that stuff. Yeah, talk about investment there, right? To a point that we literally one day, and we lived on Long Island. If you hadn't guessed by the accent when I say that word, right? And we decided to go to a random practice at one point that was like maybe 20, 30 minutes away. And going through that, and I didn't have any of my own gear, so I was just there to spectate. Jesse had like brought his own stuff. He was already like buying stuff. And going through the talk about the training, like they were legitimately doing a hands-on training for combat session with him, teaching him how to move, how to weave, how to hit, asking him his like type of preferred combat style, et cetera, et cetera. And then you got to talk about like this entire breakdown of the social structure and hierarchy of this entire event of like, you have these various kingdoms, you have these subsections, you have these domains. This is where you can fit as far as your role. You're a guard here, you're a guard. Wild, right? Of course, I was 17 and a little bit of an edgelord, so it all went out the window. Fast forward to college, and I had a second run-in with LARP, which was at this point Boffer, right? Which much cheaper than SCA. But this was for Dagger here because I went to school at Penn State. Never really got into it, but was like, oh, cool, that's a thing. And like it was through my my relations in Humans vs. Zombies, which was also, again, fast forward to the future. Didn't realize that was a LARP that I was actively playing in. So there's my real first LARP of just running around a college campus, pretending to be a zombie, tagging people. There's video of it online. Please don't go look for it. Look, when you start throwing socks at people and you get known for that, that's a weird feeling as an adult in your 30s afterwards. But we used to have like these giant invitationals that would come in. And through that, we developed a lot of these connections. Like I said, I met Ryan through there. I would have met Collin if I stuck around for like another half second to actually meet him. But no, it's legit. Like at Penn State, the first Penn State HVZ Invitational, like you were supposed to be there. We even went to Ball State. Literally, Collin was right there. Never met him until 2015. 7 years later. Crazy world, right? Anyway, so fast forwarding from that, again, like 6-ish years of really nothing, then I decided to go to Gen Con, and I just took the dive. You know, like I said, these guys were talking about what they experienced in that night of Vancouver LARP, and I just wanted to take a leap and join. And much like what it is what it is now. Like, this community of City of Glass has developed into so many fostered friendships. That's kind of insane. We went from a LARP of barely like 20-ish people, 30 people maybe, in that 2015, 2016 range, to now our main LARP at Gen Con itself, with all staff included, is about 115 people. And it is wild. And like, I can go into it when we go into talking about like how do you prep for a convention like Gen Con, just to talk to you about what it was like post-pandemic when nothing was offered at Gen Con. We were one of the primary events, especially a LARP event at Gen Con.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Brent.
Well, I've always kind of been familiar with LARP, but it's usually been described as, like the people putting on the wizard robes and throwing tennis balls at each other in the park, and there was a certain amount of negative social cachet with that, we'll say. Also, I'm kind of like, I'm the type of person that, like, I've done laser tag, I've done paintball. We're gonna go with paintball because I like the more authenticity of, like, actually taking the hit, actually running around doing the things. You know, um, if you're going to do the costuming, make the costume and have it be authentic. Like, I have made 2 vault suits, one for myself and one for that was auctioned off for Desert Bus for Hope when I volunteered for them way back in the day. I like things to be as real or authentic or practical as possible. And this is where I'm going to hype up you guys and the community and everything. And because World of Darkness is grounded, people show up in costumes, which are a lot easier to make because you just go get some fancy clothes, as opposed to making a full set of like scale armor or something like that. It's an excuse to expand your wardrobe, like dual purpose. You know,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
nerds upping their riz by going to LARP, and it the City of Glass is also great because they have like intro or like onboarding sessions specifically for new players that just sit you down and run through it. And so it's, you know, the on ramp is so easy to get onto, so you can just hit the ground running when it's actually starting time for the session. And it's so much easier to feel like you're actually doing the thing when you're like, well, you know, I'm this Malkavian who's like got who's just like an enforcer, and I got like my plaid shirt and my bully the rich hoodie or toque on, and I'm running around obfuscating, doing the things, as opposed to just like, I am an oath paladin and I've got a t-shirt on, like yeah,
Yeah.
like it just it makes the suspension of disbelief so much easier, at least for me in my experience. And City of Glass is my first real LARP that I've jumped in with both feet, and it's so great and enjoyable, and it works so well. And like, again, just the onboarding makes it so much easier. There's so many, staff and other players, just the community as a whole is like, hey, this, uh, you know, I've seen people do check-ins with other people, out of the corner of the eye to make sure, because it's a world of darkness and safety tools are important, like, and that reaffirms the community is safe, accepting, works together. We are creatively making something, but at the same time being safe and building that community. And so, uh just to circle back again, the fact that you can be like, oh well, I don't really like dressing up, or I don't have a lot of clothes, but this year I'm going to be playing the asshole boardroom Ventru, so I got to get a nice suit and tie. Well, I can actually wear that to a job interview, so it's a good investment.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about the World of Darkness versus like your fantasy LARPs is the immersion factor. I think that in terms of cost and immersion and creating the product, World of Darkness lends itself to LARP a lot easier than fantasy LARPs. It's not impossible because I was in one of, in my mind, the most immersive D&D LARPs I've ever been a part of. Like when I say immersive, we had orcs that painted their face green and wore the tusks and had the costumes, and like we had people who were a dragon who had like a sheet they put over themselves and they had wings and the whole thing, and they were like 15 people that erected themselves into a dragon and the whole thing. Like it was a big freaking deal. Like they did the whole thing all out, but it's expensive and it's not something that everybody can do. But as far as a World of Darkness LARP, most of us have these outfits in our houses, like you said, a suit for a job interview. You can put that, you might have that already from a wedding or whatever the case may be. And you can be a Ventru, or you can be a street Bruja just based off of your old painter's clothes. Like you have these things to do. Now, of course, when you get into like Werewolf Krynos form, that does require a little bit more imagination. So I've seen kind of the opposing ends when it comes to LARPs of immersion, because I've also seen World of Darkness LARPs where people just have the note cards pinned to their chest that say like, I'm wearing a Spider-Man outfit or something like that. And it's kind of like, well, okay, that's like, all right, what is even happening here? So it can go to the far extents of both ways, but I do think of LARPs, World of Darkness is one of the more practical possible LARPs to do on an affordable basis, especially if you can find a good location to do it in. But also it can, in my mind, be done badly if you don't put the effort into it.
So to build off on that a little bit, to express like what it's like for us at GenCon, we actually have a really good spattering and mix of both sides. For instance, Arden has a full-on leather set that he wears. No, not a leather daddy, a leather armor set that he wears.
Right.
Important clarification there.
It
is a very important clarification.
we have two little memes going on right now, which is we have a couple of people. One of their names is Yvonne, the other is Cal, who go into these super elaborate, like they custom sew their outfits as well. And Yvonne has been taking a huge effort to be a classical dress sewer and seamstress. It's wild, her journey. Like if you see some of her outfits, hopefully some people will see them at the LARP this year. They're insane. But then we also have people who are very minimalist and like try to use the theater of the mind to create that. Honestly, the idea of someone having a post-it note and going, I'm wearing a Spider-Man outfit, might just be a mage and a quiet that we have in the future. Who knows? But that to say, I do have a little funny anecdote, which was us as a staff. We had one player consistently through NOLA who loved to use time magic. And specifically,
never mind.
Oh, what you're thinking about different? No,
I got another one.
Specifically, loved to use time magic and loved to invoke paradox from that. And as you know, time magic has a lot of really, really bad effects. We decided to screw it up, including full erasure of people from timelines, including and up to yourself. Right? We went on eBay or Amazon one day, and we were trying to find out if we could get a specific prop for this character that when they hit a certain level of paradox, we were literally going to take their sheet and go, GG, right? We have this thing within the Dreaming, a time paradox spirit, basically the Ouroboros, that we simply call the Time Snake. And our meme is the Time Snake always wins.
It does.
So what our plan was we were going to buy one of the Chinese New Year dragons, and this blends into you're talking about how you had like 15 people kind of mech suit a dragon for your LARP. And we were going to have all of our staff parade this into the room, like do a full scene pause on the entire game, and just like have someone with like a drum just kind of beat a drum and just literally parade this into the game, go up to this player and simply go, the Time Snake always wins, and then consume his character.
That's amazing. So we've got a whole lot of questions from our
Yeah.
community, and we're already an hour into this
We're
interview.
only-
So we're going to try and get through these questions because I have so much more I want to talk to you guys about. So we're going to try and rapid fire through these questions and get to, because there's so much we can talk about. You guys have been wonderful so far. But let's get to these questions. First off, how did you all come up with the concept for some of the LARPs that you guys have run? Because you are running games as a team. What are how did you come up with some of the concepts for the games you've run so far, or some of the games you are about to run?
That's probably best suited for me right now. So at GenCon itself, we have our major blockbuster multi-splat LARP, which has been built from development of what Collin had mentioned with regard to the Darkest Remembered game, and then building on from that. And what we do is we build our chronicles in 3-year chunks, and then we develop and scope based upon a setting that we really want to hit on. For instance, this one is Boston Salem, so we really want to hit upon like a mage heavy setting. New Orleans was a very changeling heavy setting. San Francisco is like a very much banal vampire setting, but also with a good spattering of wolf. And like we always find ways to introduce these settings. As far as our other LARP offerings that we'll have at Gen Con this year that are repeats of some of the events previously, we have a a What We Do in the Shadows inspired based Vampire the Masquerade LARP called the What We Do in the series. Last year, the first year was just simply What We Do in the Sabbat. Very simple exploration, very silly, everything else like that. Last year was What We Do at the Beach, which was this HOA was putting on an entire beach-like event, and the players in that game had to partake in a limbo contest, a Queen of the Beach contest, an election for the committee to select the Queen of the Beach, a fruit punch thing.
Castle.
There was with kinetic sand,
sandcastle building contest.
And the players went all out. We had a Nosferatu that was in the full like white paint of like the suntan lotion, everything, and like just heavy on the nose. They were just perfect. We had a Zamiti player who made these giant floaties that were made to look like eyeballs. It was insane. I think we might have pictures somewhere that we could share to your socials at some point. What we also have going on this year as new ones, we have a LARP called Witch Gates, which is developed from inspired by Mage the Ascension, and it's being run by a player in our community. They go by Daja. I'm not quite sure what their first name is, but that's what their alias is. That is actually a new innovation off of the simplistic LARP parlor system, whereby he uses a set of stones in a bag to determine if you win or lose a chop based upon what you're able to present. Successes and failures in that same degree, and degrees of success too. We also have, and this might really peak off some people if they're aware of different genres of horror, we're presenting an Old Gods of Appalachia inspired LARP this year. That is a full custom system developed by one of our community members, Cal. And we're actually using like the notation cards of the Old Gods of Appalachia cipher system to build out some of that aspect. We also have another werewolf LARP happening called Mending Old Wounds. It's going to be run by staffers of ours, Josh and Nate, and a couple of other of our community members. And these are all at Gen Con through various days, and that catalog literally goes live tomorrow.
That's amazing.
So as far as inspiration for it, literally, if you are in my community, come to me with an idea, or just in my space and come to me with an idea, I'll help workshop you with it, and then we'll just make it a thing that happens.
But it sounds like what you do is you pick maybe like a splat, or at least a concept, even if it's a wild one, like you said, an HOA beach party. But it seems like you start with a splat for most of these. Like you focus on werewolf or you focus on mage, and then you build off of that how to incorporate the other splats into it. But you focus on based around werewolf or based around mage, and then the other splats are kind of peppered in around it. But that's where your starting point is, and then everything else is kind of added in. The details are added in of how to tie the other elements in, but that's your starting point.
Yeah, normally that is a huge starting point, and because so much of World of Darkness has become a multi-splat kind of connection. If you go on Twitter, on Blue Sky, on anywhere in socials, the typical design of a game you're looking for to get bigger is people want to include more of the splats. So by trying to scope out a focus on a splat that maybe isn't focused on initially, and then helping to include all the others around that, we're able to build a world that is much more narratively driven. We're able to build those connections, not just between players as far as their characters, but also splat to splat conflict and resolutions within that. And we use a lot of that as a basis to get people involved, to keep our system living, and to really make the world living and breathing. And hopefully we bring that to other players when they join us too. And then we try to establish a setting that fits what that theme is and go from there.
Amazing.
I think what Erik said, it starts very macro, and then usually sometimes there's like the funny ha-has, oh what if, and then that gets embellished and built upon. But I think it does start very macro. We start around maybe a splat that's very specific, or a theme. A theme is very important to us. Collin is always looking for ways to make sure that there's a clinical through line in terms of theming and whatever it is that whatever we're trying to portray or tell in this story. It's obviously very collaborative, but I think it starts very macro and then becomes very micro.
So you said you run these games in 3-year arcs, but how long does it take to plan one of these games from start to finish? And now, obviously, with a 3-year arc, it's going to take at least 3 years. But I want to say, how long does it take to plan from start to launch? So how long does it take to plan from the start to the first event? So how long in advance do you start planning before you're going to actually start running said event?
Oh, I had an answer for from start to finish.
Give me that answer then. Yeah, whatever works. Let's go for it.
I could do the both, but I'm sorry, I had already talked to them about
That's
this.
fine. I know it was written that way, but I was kind of thinking like, well,
No,
at
you're
least
fine.
3 years.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of like from start to launch, generally, at least with the process that we observed in Boston, NOLA was just a little bit different because of the Panini and GenCon being canceled for the year. We were given a grace period of another year of development for that narrative and that plot. Boston and as far as I'm aware, other chronicles would basically start. We have our GenCon at the beginning of August. And by the grace of Collin on high, he gives us, the rest of the month to breathe and decompress and kind of, gather our wits, whether we're going into, inner year stuff, or we're, letting just kind of life kind of level out, or before we start developing a new project. So usually around the start of September, after we've concluded a previous chronicle, we'll start working on that next chronicle, developing, brainstorming ideas, and that process is usually September to about middle of November, beginning of December, just because the holidays get really hectic for folks, and so we kind of take a little bit of a step back for folks to enjoy their time with their families. And then early January, we hit the ground running, finalizing at least. We try to finalize the main plot points for the nights, for the 3 nights of Gen Con that we're coming up to. Understanding that the trajectory of the plot for year 2 and year 3 can be like minor little bullet points or smaller little bullet points, but we have to create the roadmap starting with our with the first year. We have to. I usually am quoted with the allegory of the plane has to leave the tarmac. We have to get the plane in the air before we can really start to talk about anything else. And that's kind of how it works from launch. Once we get things kind of nailed down there in the early part, January, February, by that time, there's a lot of work that's being done in terms of developing the characters. I think somebody mentioned previously, we do bespoke character bios and bespoke character sheets for a vast majority. I'd say about 60 to 70% of our player base gets these bespoke character bios that are crafted by the storytelling staff over the course of the development period. And then we do also create we have an offering for like one night players. Sometimes that the 3-night commitment, much less a 3-year commitment, is kind of intimidating to some folks, and they might not be super jazzed or super into that from the onset. So actually in NOLA, Collin and Erik had developed an idea of these kind of one-night characters, something to at least give somebody a taste. So we're not necessarily handing out those character sheets or character bios, but give them a taste, give them an opportunity to kind of jump in, get their feet wet, experience what it's like, and if they want to move forward with that character, or maybe they want to actually step into one of the other characters, more than welcome to do that. We work with them very closely on that. But the thing that I was going to say in terms of how does the development cycle go from, start to finish is we run our Chronicles in 3 years, 3 nights of GenCon all 3 years. And we we start the development in like early September. And then by about 10:30 on night 3 of year 3, we figured out how to land the plane.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, you finally figured it out.
Finally,
at the end.
The divine rock hits us, and Collin, Erik, and I we stop and we see each other from across the room, and we're like, conference. We figured it out. We know what we're doing.
We have that group epiphany. It's just the brain cell immediately clicked and shared.
So everybody can kind of pitch in on this one with like a small anecdote or a small answer to this, but what's the biggest challenge you face running a LARP at a big con like Gen Con? Because I imagine when you're looking at possibly crowds of 20, 30, 50, 100 people, especially people with varying levels of chemistry, with varying levels of experience and talent and, knowledge and all these different things. And believe me, I can relate running this server. What's the biggest challenge you find yourself facing with that kind of event? Go ahead.
So it has to be broken up into a few different parts there, right? The first part itself is all the prep, which I'm going to let Arden and Collin share a little bit more on as far as that goes, because we will offer our event and then players will come into our chat and then want to develop something. But like I said, that's for them. As far as the actual at the show stuff, right? The most difficulty we face in this event is making sure that we are keeping our players engaged in the various means and plots that we have, and the actual getting it set off for the night. That includes player check-in, all of your badges and tickets are scanned. That includes getting your bio, getting your sheet. We have new player introductions as well to help people start to understand mechanics when they're a first-time player. And we try our best, especially in the year ones of our Chronicles, to lower the power scaling of those characters and try not to have as much carryover from previous Chronicles, because that's a big thing in other orgs too, like an MES or an Obi-Wan or anything else like that, to try to give people both a new flavor for what they're going to develop, but also look at the sheet and see that it's not as scary as a huge year 3 sheet may look like, right? And what that also entails is making sure that people are in place, ready to go. We, as storytellers, have had our conferences. We know what our first launch point scenes are going to be, but also just making sure all of our staff are in place as a whole. We have 3 people typically doing the door check-in. We then have another person who's typically dedicated to handing out their character sheets and bios based upon the splat. We have 3 people helping out with new player orientation on the side. That's like still kind of spilling over. We have our 5 storytellers or 4 storytellers, depending upon what kind of setup we have for that year. And then we have our narrators, which can number like, I think we had 5 or 6 narrators last year. And then we have adjudicators that help keep things moving in place too. So it's all just a big logistics puzzle as far as making sure we keep as many plates spinning as possible to getting to go. And really for me, the most daunting task is just all the set that leads up to game on. And I'll especially let Collin talk about what's like at during game itself as far as like coordinating those problems, getting by those.
Yeah, Collin, go ahead.
So a LARP itself is primarily driven by conversation. When you break it down into its like core component, you essentially have an event that is so many hours long of people talking to each other. I mean, you might have some level of performance, you might have some level of theatrics. There are some very like bespoke events that are happening that are run by troops that have like some pretty crazy even pyrotechnics and stuff that happen that'll draw some like but at the very core of things, it's just people talking to people for hours and hours and hours at a time. So you have a limited number of staff. that can be basically meted out for a scene. You have players that need to go over to them to ask for clues, to run, to get resources sometimes, to ask questions, clarifications, to have people weigh in on fights and occasions like that. All of that stretches the bandwidth of what somebody has time to do. And when people are waiting on a staff member to adjudicate on a scene or to play an NPC that they're looking to speak to, that essentially pauses their ability to engage within the scene, within their character, right? So these are some of the obstacles and things that you will essentially deal with within a LARP. So when you are planning for a LARP, when you've got like enough kind of experience to grapple with these issues, the point or the thing that I try to build for is you've got PvE and PvP. So players versus environment, in which case the benefits of that is it gives people a lot to rally together on. They're not fighting each other. They get to fight the staff, faceless NPCs or faceful NPCs, but they don't get to feel guilty about that. You get to stomp those guys. It's great. Everyone gets to feel collectively good about that because they're not technically ruining anybody's day. They don't kill anybody's character or anything like that, community-wise, hoorah. PvP, however, frees up staff resources to run other things for other people, to create these bespoke experiences for the parlor LARP, to give people that kind of unique, intimate kind of experiences, to pull people aside for seekings, for like unique narrative experiences with NPCs, those moments that really draw people into the compelling moments of their characters, to run more and more scenes. So having a balance of both is essential. What we do within our characters in order to create that like PvP and PvE sort of angle is especially with like contact. So when you have people that have a lot of experience versus people that have new experience, and there's a level of not knowing who's going to be showing up at the LARP, what we do have is a lot of faith within the returning players for our community. So what we essentially have are like sort of community ambassadors, or the players that we know are great players that are able to draw people into their plots, are great at seizing people that are connected to their plots and pulling them in and being like, all right, cool. All right, so I'm a train. I'm going through this wall, but you hit your wagon to the back of me. We're going through this wall together, and you're going to smash your wall while I'm going through with my wall. We're just going to make a slight adjustment to this track, and we're going to hit both walls at the same time. So like when you create the new characters for like this next year, so when we're creating the new characters for this upcoming GenCon, we establish between ourselves like who are the more active players that have been keeping, that we essentially know are going to be making their way back this next year. We're going to make characters that have connections to them. Everybody coming in that have established connections to these characters, and then of course have backup connections in case something should happen, that player cannot make it or something like that. Obviously there's backup possibilities there. So you interconnect the web so that they have a reason to go up to these players and be like, hey, I have this kind of connection. And we know that player is going to be like, oh, solid. Okay, nice. I got like a new connection. I got like maybe like a cousin, or ooh, I've got like a nemesis now. Oh, solid. Oh, I've been meaning to have one of these. And like then the plot kind of like takes it off. You've got like a new person who's like, oh, maybe I don't really know what to do. I don't know this sheet super well. And like, maybe this is like my first time LARPing. I'm kind of like a little bit shy. And someone's like, yeah, no worries about it. Hey, it's cool. I'm more experienced about this. I'm going to ask your question, what you want to do here and there, to whatever you're comfortable with. But since you're part of my plot, I'm going to take you along for the ride. And that draws people into the plot a lot better than just handing them a character and being like, here you go, here's a character, a bunch of history, bunch of plot, figure it out. And then they just stand there on the side being like, oh, I'm supposed to hunt somebody down, but I don't even know who that person is. And like, I don't know how these powers work. And then they just end up having a bad time because they're just standing around on the side being like, well, I'm an assassin. Nobody will hire me. But like, and like waiting for something to happen, or like not even knowing, like, oh, but this ST seem busy all the time, and so I can't like go and talk to them. It's just valid, but like it's hard to know what's going on.
Yeah.
So
And
you
that's
have-
that's I found
Yeah.
being as a play on the player side of things is getting engaged, especially if you've come into an already established LARP or a game that's already mid-process. Like if you show up late to a game, which I never recommend players do, be there at the start. Like do not show up mid-game, because it's a lot harder to get into the game if it's already been going for a while. But like, yeah, when you've gone into a game, especially if it's like day 2 of a 3-day game, it is hard to feel like you can get into the action. So when storytellers have thought about that and have done things to make sure that there are precautions for that, or have made plans for that in advance, that's always really, really nice for the players who are more introverted or are a little, have a harder time finding hooks and finding ways in. That's really, really nice.
I'm doing this for like 10 plus years. So over the time, that's how I've started to structure characters and stuff like that, where I'm like, all right, so you're only going to be here for one day. You're coming in like what, like night 2. All right. None of these characters are for you, but this character, all right, this one will pop off night 2 into night 3. You can make it night 2 and night 3, right? Okay. These 3 characters can pop off from night 2 to night 3. But
That's awesome.
I can't give you any of these other ones. Their plots are a little too slow. But these guys will go. These guys will work for you.
Oh, that's awesome.
The amount you got it,
Go
Arden,
ahead.
first.
Oh.
No, you got it.
Appreciate it. I think one of the things that Collin mentioned should be just like further highlighted, especially with Brent here in the chat, just because when we're in the transition, not just between Chronicles, but between years, we really rely heavily on the community and our player base to ensure that we kind of have that connective tissue, because the greatest death of all LARPs and the engagement with the LARP is going to be the availability of the storytellers for one reason or another. And so having players like Brent this past year for the start of Boston, he and I had a conversation while we were building his character. He was set up to kind of be a pillar of one whole facet of the vampire community of Boston. And so knowing that I had Brent in that position, I could then create the rest of the cadre and the rest of the plots that, if a new player would walk in and be like, okay, I'd like to be a part of this organization, Brent had the Anarchs. Brent, you got the Anarchs, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, there was that great moment where we were in the VC going over my character, Mattson Reed Gangrel, who has a theater in South Boston, just like orators up his own butt, but in the best way possible. And we're just going back and forth building this character, and Arden, you said that moment, or had that moment where you said, and we have our Anarch leader, and I'm just like, okay, cool, awesome, I can run with this.
And because he could run with that, and he does run with it very well, I knew that if any player came in and they wanted to be a part of the Anarchs, whether they were excited to, or they were just a little nervous about jumping into a LARP, whatever their circumstances might be, but I knew that I could place them with an Anarch. I knew I could point them at Brent, and they would be set for the night. They had someone that was there present for them. They could run with them for their entire plot. They could rope Brent in. Brent could rope them in. And not only that, but like we have a trust with Brent, and so if anything's coming up, I come in to check in. We can make sure that everything's cool with that new character, with that new player. I can check in with Brent, make sure he's on the right direction, that he's stable, he's satisfied, all of that. It's about it's with all things, it's
I don't know if I'm stable, but I appreciate the trust.
You're stable on the floor, my guy.
Okay.
Yeah, being able to delegate is important.
It's also interesting to note, especially for our community, our LARP. I alluded to it earlier. In 2021, when we hosted our LARP at GenCon, and we were, like I said, the only World of Darkness LARP there, which was a shock for us, let alone one of the only LARPs in the evening at all. Because so many other orgs had to cancel their stuff because obvious reasons, right? We had only 14 players who bought all 3 nights of tickets, yet we had 60 tickets available each night. We had about 30 or 40 players who only bought tickets for night 1. And because of the scope of what we built out, of our bios, of our inclusivity, of our contacts, of getting them involved in every step that we could, we wound up having a player retention at the end of that show that was about 82 players a night. So not only did we have our hooks in for people on, the first time they came in night one, but those players repeatedly showed up, brought other people, and then we had our fun logistics problem. Oh, we have all these other event tickets we have to honor first. Wild time. But that just speaks to, what we built up, Collin's philosophy as far as getting all this interconnectivity involved, and what we've built out over, he says 10 years, literally about 12 years, which is insane.
That's amazing. So how do you balance letting players create chaos while keeping the story moving?
Doesn't that just come with the territory of being a ST?
But even we're talking about in a massive scale here, though, because at a table, when you're talking about 3 to 6 players, that's one thing. But when we're talking about 60 players, and we're talking about factions, and we're talking about half the players versus another third of the players, or this can get massive. Plus, we're talking about also from a business perspective and a player retention perspective, and we're talking about the impact it could have on your ability to come back the following year, and there's a lot more factors to take into effect here versus just this is me and my friends sitting at a table. Maybe they'll fight about it afterwards, but then we'll all make up, go out for beers, and we'll be fine. There's a lot more to consider here on this scale. So
for me, it's always about vigilance, and it's always about that communication amongst the staff. One thing that I've always been campaigning for, even since I was a player for City of Glass, was in a perfect world we have at minimum 2 narrators for every 1 storyteller to kind of help keep things moving, keep the works lubricated and so forth. But in terms of a player over on this side of the room has decided to do something unexpected and crazy, not necessarily game breaking, but definitely something that we as a storyteller staff weren't prepared for. What that comes down to in terms of how we're able to make that work, spin that up, and make sense of it is, I'm in the scene. A player does this thing, and I go, amazing. Okay, we're gonna wrap this scene up real quick, because I want to give you guys the satisfying ending to this scene and have you guys kind of move on in this direction, in whatever direction really that you wanted to. And once I'm done with that, I'm gonna run over to wherever Collin is. I'm gonna run over to the nearest ST and be like, okay, so this is where we're at. This is kind of the events that are happening. I have an idea of where this direction is. Here's that little kind of my brief bullet point. How do we make this work? And it's keeping that constant flow going. During GenCon, particularly, we have a lunch that we always have, or an ST breakfast or lunch or something, where we kind of go over the events of the previous night. And that's a huge point of contact for us outside of the game, where we can kind of look at certain circumstances and situations and be, okay, how do we make this work? How do we maintain our continuity? How do we work this into the plot? How do we react to this? Because it's a living, breathing setting. So how do we, everyone has the ability to impact the setting in the exact same way and gravitas that anyone else does. So how do we maintain that? And it's a communication. I don't particularly have a surefire, and this is point A, point B, point C on how we deal with that. I might have to give that over to Collin, but it's all about the communication. It's all about that willingness to yes and or yes but, and kind of work between what each of the storytellers are trying to communicate. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to tell the same story, no matter no matter what I'm doing with a Sabbat in this corner and what Collin is doing with the traditions in this corner. At the end of the day, one plane has to land.
Yeah, Brent.
So from the player perspective, it is very clear that the community, when you're on ramping, all of that, it's you are not the protagonist. This is a LARP. This is a giant collective storytelling, And because, like, it's not at a table, like you said, you could kind of make it look like each scene is a table or what have you. And people can get long-winded, get sucked into this back and forth that soaks up a whole bunch of time. But because there's other tables, other groups, other pods, however you want to phrase it, going, uh, pretty soon you realize, oh, I need to be punchy. I need to be, like, getting it to the point. I can't wax poetic forever, because eventually someone like Arden is going to stand up on a chair and say, "Vampire players, anybody at the Malice, this is happening." And you're just like, oh fuck, I was talking to someone and now I don't have a chance to talk to them because they're fighting a Greek gladiator out front.
I
This
wish
guy
I
who
had.
looks
I wish I had 100 people who thought like that when I was running LARP situations.
It's also, I think we're very fortunate that we have managed to kind of curate and gather a community that does have that kind of framework of mindset, that has that kind of builds that collaborative kind of storytelling community together. Because honestly, it's fairly easy to collapse a LARP, and there are a lot of powers. So they can be like, I'm going to try to just destroy the entire city, flood the whole city. It would theoretically end the LARP and stuff for everyone. We've had situations where folks have tried to do something like that, where like win at any cost, exactly everyone else's cost specifically. And when it comes to that, it comes down to like the question of player autonomy versus everybody else's experience. There's certain like narrative fiats that can come in where you have to kind of negotiate. It comes down to a negotiation where it's like, how can we give you as much as you want for your story's resolution without that compromising the enjoyment of everybody else that is here? And that comes down to let's like time out for a second. Let's talk about this. Which your character wants this in this moment, but realistically, we're not going to send everybody home. So let's talk about what would be a good point that we can still find you the closure that you need, narratively speaking, that you can get what you want, but also we can continue the game for everybody else, because everyone else is also looking for a closure, and we're all building this together. Fortunately, we haven't had to have very many experiences like that. I mean, it's World of Darkness PvP. We got werewolves and vampires and mages in the same setting, and yet like our player kill counts is kind of low. It with a lot of werewolves, and realistically, if the werewolves all mobbed together and just started at one side of the room and just started going like group by group, they'd probably just clear out the room eventually, if it comes down to numbers and stuff like that. But like, that's just not how the community is built. Folks have just like an aversion to being like, and now your experience is over, leave. Like they want to be like,
that's how you kill the game, right? Like that's
exactly,
just
it's kind of how you kill the game, and nobody wants to do that. They want to see how the story ends. Right. We have folks that feel, I think, the same way that you feel about the narrative and the mechanics. They want to see how the story goes. They want to resolve conflict. There's a thing that I announced like at the beginning of the game where I'm like, look, we have a chop system, but you don't need us for that. Technically, if you guys want to, you can narrate how the combat goes. Just have an out of character conversation, be like, look, this is what I want out of the scene. This is what you want out of the scene. I am comfortable getting this out of the scene if you get this out of the scene, and we can just talk about how the scene goes down. Like, you lose an arm and like I try to kill you, but you manage to escape by the skin of your teeth, and then we just like shake hands, we go our opposite way. It's not what my character really wants, and it's not what your character really wants, but that's the compromise.
It's compromise, yeah.
We just
absolutely
go. We don't have to chop it out, y'all. We can just, it's a story. We can just do that. You just let us know how it goes down. It's cool.
I love it.
Like, that's how we play it. Our community is like that.
Well, that brings me to the next question. How do you plan for surprises or things players might do that you didn't expect? And of course, again, this is storytelling. You know, this could be said about the table scenario of like, what would you do as a storyteller? But again, in a LARP setting, things are different, because what a player might do, or what a group of players might do in a LARP setting, could send shockwaves through an entire LARP or an entire scenario. How do you plan for that? Or do you have things in place to safeguard against that, to stop the possibility of a group potentially going on a killing spree and killing off the entire LARP, or, you know, setting off an atom bomb that destroys the entire city, or, you know, doing something ridiculous? Because I have been in LARPs before where a group of players shows up and causes the entire LARP to go bad because they came in with this mindset of, we're going to take over. And, you know, it's a bad thing to happen, but without the proper management, without the proper, you know, structure in place of staff, they weren't ready to prevent that. They weren't ready for that. And therefore they let that happen, and it ended up killing the game. So like, what do you have? Do you have anything for those scenarios, or how do you plan for that kind of stuff?
So I'll kick some of that over to Erik in just a second, but I will say that I think one thing that we have going for us, and it's not a perfect system because you can straight up ignore it. No, we've had players that do, is that we, except for the one nighters that we generally have, most of our characters are pre-written. They have a bio from basically from a first person perspective. They have like character notes, they have goals, they have contacts. So when we hand you a character, they have their whole story written down. You've got your goals, you've got your history, you've got your context. So you know what you're there to do. You know who you know all of your tie-ins, and you know exactly what the story is that's going to be laid out before you. So walking in, you've got everything you need to gear yourself, immersify yourself within the tale, and you know who you're going to go and talk to that's going to help you with your story, that knows your story or is an important piece of your story to help you get involved with what is happening, rather than like walking in with your buddies and then you make a kill squad together.
Fair.
And then you're like,
Yeah.
all right, here we go. Now we rolling. And we're here to do that. That's just, we haven't really made like a kill squad ready to go, like, you know, out to just murder their way around we just don't write those guys.
So pre-gen characters, that is actually a preventative measure, I would say, is like having those pre-generated characters. Absolutely, that is an answer. So yeah.
And those generally the players that start to be that kind of disruptive element, they don't tend to stay. The community as a whole has been kind of good at sort of pushing them out. And I don't want to, again, like I said, toss the rest of that over to Erik.
Yeah, so as Collin mentioned, like we have had so many situations happen before. We've even had it happen with some pre-generated characters before, where we had a character, as a key example, that had a slew of influences. They were a vampire, right? And the way that the LARP system works is that you can either spend your influence or you can burn it for additional effect, right? This character literally had about 28 points of baseline influence, and they wanted to burn them as they were leaving the LARP to try to summon the Second Inquisition. So what happened is that we, as the storytellers, and we even include our narrators, we kind of got together. It was like, okay, so this is what a player is proposing. Do we even let this fly in the first place? And I think a very important thing is, and part of my game philosophy is that there isn't just yes and no but. Sometimes no is also an incredibly valid answer to a thing, especially if it means protecting the play style, the play of all the other players there. And also importantly, all of our players are also paying, right? We have to make sure we honor it on so many different levels. And what we do in not just that scenario, but in any other scenario where we feel that disruption is coming about, is we make sure we have a clear through line of who players can go to, but also who our staff can go to. If a player is having a disruption for any number of reasons, they can approach an adjudicator. If they're not able to feel that they get a resolution from that adjudicator, or they're not able to find one, We make sure there's our narrators available. If our narrators are not available, they're wrapped in scenes, whatever. We also make sure that we as storytellers are always present and available. Before our LARP even begins, we make sure we introduce every single level of our staff. And we also have a front desk admin, usually done by Mal. Last year, we also had Pierce, that are there to take down what happens in scenes at times, or if they feel there's a scenario that has to be escalated to us, they'll make sure they find us on a splat by splat level, but also the larger LARP level. And then if we feel there's any other resolution has to come from that, we do initiate at very rare times, like full LARP pauses that only last about 5-ish minutes, and we've only had to do it a couple of times to make sure we as a staff sort things out and decide what has to be done to either incorporate it or to reject it. And everything we do as a means of this is to make sure our players, the majority of our players, as many as we can have involved, feel they're having a good time, a worthwhile time. And we do everything we can also to make sure that we keep our environment healthy and safe, not just on an in-character's perspective, but also respecting everyone outside of the game as well. This is a little bit of a statistic I'll throw in just for right now, because I don't know where it would fit otherwise. Since the pandemic began, our community organization has mostly been kind of like the straight white guy community, right? Ever since 2021, the vast majority of our community identifies somewhere on the LGBTQIA spectrum. I'm talking about 67% now, where it's kind of an anomaly to have someone who's just like straight. It's kind of hilarious in that way. We have evolved our staff to include not just femme and non-binary and gender fluid respective people, but also BIPOC individuals. I myself am mixed indigenous myself. We have people from various different backgrounds and various different cultural experiences to make sure we build as best, complete, and respectful a LARP as we can. And that just further flows into how we make sure we handle those disruptions and things that we can't plan for, to make sure we keep things flowing as best we can for the 6 hours we got you.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing, because I know one of the big things that's brought up is representation in the community, and I'm glad to see that is something that is considered in the LARPing sphere, is that's something that you guys especially take into consideration. So I'm happy to hear about that. Brent, go ahead.
One little point. While all the characters, we pointed out that they're pre-gen as, part of the safety tool integration to make sure that the LARP runs properly. I don't want people to get scared off by that, because it is very much, you get out what you put in. I have spent time with the staff to be like, hey, this is kind of what I am thinking. We go back and forth, and Matheson is like, the skeleton was there already. He was going to be that archetype there somewhere. Anarch leader TM, how he presented was, nebulous. And we sat down, we spent, I think it was like an hour and a half in a VC Arden, going back and forth and just fleshing out this character. So even though he is a pre-generated character, he is still my character, if that makes sense. Like, you get out what you put in, and they're great people. And if you have the time to be like, hey, I want to try this, I'm gonna join the Discord and like try to make it out even for one night. The staff is great, and they'd be happy. I don't want to volunteer people, but I'm sure they would be happy to work with you and be like, okay, yeah, no, this is what we can get for you. And so you're not just like showing up and like, I am Brewhaw Stephen Smith, I am angry, and I need to punch Jones McGillicuddy because he burned down my bar,
Right. Yeah.
So we are nearing the 2-hour point, so I want to check in with you, gentlemen. Are we good to keep going? Are you guys good to keep answering some questions here, or should we start wrapping up? I want to make sure we're good here. I don't want to take up too much of your time tonight, but we do still have a bunch of community questions, and I do still have other things to talk about.
I'm good to keep going.
I'm good to keep going. I wouldn't mind maybe a 30-second break.
Yeah, go ahead. If you want to step away for a second, that's fine. Yeah, so speaking of that, though, I would ask, we've got some... You can go ahead. You step away, Arden. I'll talk to the others while you go. But
You've been released.
You have been released. what do you guys do in situations when you do have like disagreements between players? How do you resolve those situations? Like if you do, because you said you do let the players kind of decide for themselves how to resolve things sometimes. If you don't have, if you don't want to have a storyteller get involved, sometimes you'll let the players dictate for themselves. But if you do have disagreements or things start to get tense, how do you usually resolve those situations? Or if there is any kind of conflict between players, or if things start to get heated, how do you handle those kinds of situations?
Right. So it kind of depends, of course, on the severity of the situation in general. Um, Especially at the LARP, there can be a bit of a fog of war thing going on where if you're in a scene, you don't really see everything that's happening at all given points in time. It's where we rely on like the adjudicators and the narrators, and also we let community members know and during our announcements that if there is complaints, anybody is feeling kind of uncomfortable or anything like that, you can let the front desk folks know. They'll cue in the storytellers to kind of let us know, at which point we'll approach the people that are involved, kind of pull them aside and try to talk it out. The first approach kind of at every point is to try to at least establish what is happening, diffuse the situation, understand the situation, see if we can find some kind of like peaceable alternative here. Obviously, if there's like, we've had some folks that were a little bit like tipsy, substance, something like that. I mean, there's where we are in the Illinois ballroom, there's a bar downstairs. So some folks take a break, go down there. And so sometimes some folks are a little bit tipsy coming up. They seem a little bit not great. We're like, maybe take a walk, come back in a couple of hours, check in with us. If you seem okay, great. Otherwise, maybe come back tomorrow. We if this if what has happened has been especially severe, we have no problem asking someone to walk, to leave. We prioritize the safety of our players, how they're feeling. We want this to be an inclusive space. We've had issues sometimes or before where someone refused to utilize somebody's pronouns and to make somebody feel kind of like welcome there. And we're like, there are a lot of games in GenCon. There are a lot of places that you could go. Maybe that's a place you might want to be. Here is somewhere where we've established in the announcements that this is a place where we respect that kind of stuff. If that's not where you want to be, you can go. And that's, ideally, we want everyone to get along. There's a lot of sensitive content in World of Darkness. And, we have folks that, can call a stop to a scene, that can say, that's a little bit too much. Our storytellers know that they can just pull back on description when somebody gives them the sign that like, this is a little bit too much for me, you're hitting a trigger point for some reason. You just need to pull back on the description, fade to black on something for whatever reason. Someone needs to sit back for a moment. One of us, between a scene or something like that, will go and talk to them. I know Erik Arden, all of us have before been able to go and talk to a player that has been going through something before, and then been able to go to scene partners, people that have been with them, and like, hey, this person reacts very strongly when voices are raised very high. So, hey, storytellers, if you're in a scene with this person, that seems like somebody is going to be like, sometimes shouting the scene. Sometimes people get really into it. Just this person happens to feel very triggered by that. If you could help lower the volume for it. Doesn't need to be like a huge announcement to everybody here. Just when you're in the scene, maybe move that kind of a thing. So it's just kind of like getting involved and making sure that.
Absolutely. Well, that being said, coming from OG older edition vampire and older edition vampire LARPs, one of the things that steered people away from World of Darkness for a very long time, and especially World of Darkness LARPs, was kind of the toxic environment that was spawned around the LARP atmosphere, because it did call upon a very kind of predatory atmosphere and a very predatory type of player. And that speaks to the type of game it is, especially Vampire. It brought a certain element of player out, especially in a LARP environment. And I know that for a long time, LARPs weren't a very safe place to be, especially for certain types of people. And now, thankfully, that is not the case. I've seen more and more that LARPs are extremely safe places to be, that safety tools are very much a thing. Up until the pandemic, I had never even heard of safety tools. That tells you how in the dark I was, and I'm so glad to see that they are not, that they are so prevalent now and that they are expected. But yeah, they weren't a thing for the longest time, and I attended many LARPs in many different locations, never even heard of them. But how do you take steps to ensure that that is not the case? And are you on the lookout for those types of situations? Like, how do you reassure players? Do you find that to still kind of be the case? Do you deal with players kind of coming in with that fear and that apprehension? Have you ever even heard of that kind of reputation around these LARPs? Talk about that a little bit, I guess.
So first, let's go a little bit into like what our philosophy is as an organization, let alone our LARP as a whole, and then we'll give a key point example of something that's happened in the past. Collin already alluded to one about not respecting someone's pronouns, but I'll get into a different one in a little bit. So the first thing above anything else is that we are an affirmative consent organization. This means that in any given scene, in any given interaction, in character or out of character, the moment that someone expresses that they are uncomfortable with what is going on, we either had to include a pause in what's going on to break that down just a little bit, either taking a player to the side. As Collin mentioned, we sometimes have players that get very, I'll say the word triggered, by loud noises, by yelling, by even talks of like race, equality, gender, whatever the case is. And what we do when we recognize that going on, we have a system of things that allow people to express like they want to either talk out of character. We have like LARP hand signals, or want to pause the scene as a whole, or like they'll step away from a scene. We'll make a note of that and talk about it. So how that breaks down. First, all of our staff, all of our adjudicators, narrators, storytellers, and our front desk are in some sense or another trained to recognize when a scene is getting out of hand, when a player is getting uncomfortable, and when someone has violated someone else's consent. This means either Vampire the Masquerade talking about a predatory space, a lot of it comes down to sexual aggression and tension, right? That sort of predatory sense of like, I'm a Toreador, I use dominate. And in the old days of like the 90s and 2000s, it was a huge problem that the bleed of that was also very difficult to manage, right? And as part of that, we make sure that in these scenes, if something is about to happen, for instance, I'm about to yell in the scene because it calls for it, I will do a quick pause in the scene, say, hey guys, just as a warning, my voice is going to raise here. If that's an issue for people, you can let me know now and I'll just be a little more descriptive about it. But oftentimes, especially with some of our players, they at least appreciate the fact that we are acknowledging this is the thing that's going to happen, so they are prepared and braced for it, right? In the case of other types of content scenes, we make sure that, especially in like a sexual scene or something that may go that direction, we have fade to black opt-outs. In the case of talking about anything regarding race, we will heavily monitor what's happening in that scene to make sure it doesn't cross certain thresholds. That we can have that conversation at times, but everyone has to be prepared and everyone has to be consented for that conversation to happen. Otherwise, we either had to resolve it separately, like, these two characters are having it like this, and we'll figure out the narrative for that. Or we had to kind of like, guys, we need to take 5 on this, and like everyone catch a break, get some water, take a quick walk, whatever the case is. In the case of a player who is like really overstepping those bounds, in year 1 of NOLA, so this is 2021, right after the pandemic, or like at the eclipse end of it, right? We had a player who was very forward as a Toreador with what they were expressing and like the sleaziness of this Toreador. They ran a a sort of sex worker ring that was very like predatory in that sense. And there were players that experienced that they were getting uncomfortable with it. And like I said, we make sure that all of our staff are trained in some sense or another to recognize what's happening, but also to field that feedback from players if they feel something is uncomfortable. So players came to us about this being an uncomfortable situation, uncomfortable player. We then, as staff, we took it seriously. We made sure we talked to that player as soon as we could because we got the support after the game had concluded. We made sure we talked to the player before the game the next day began. We had that conversation. We gave them a warning first, but then it kind of repeated again. We had another conversation the next day, but that conversation was, hey, we should probably see different games. And we had to actually remove that player from the game to a point that GenCon as a whole came to us and said they acknowledged and saw it like this person's being a little uncomfortable with some people. And they told us, we're happy that you guys stepped in to take place and to make sure this wasn't the thing that continued, because if you didn't remove them, we would have. And that really speaks to an idea and play of like how we recognize these things happening and how serious we take these situations as a whole. We can't catch everything. That's an emphasis that has to be placed. Like we're not perfect, and I don't think we ever can be, but we can try our best to be as good as possible. And that also comes down to our new player orientation, where we go over what that affirmative consent is. And Sarah of Blank Bodies, has put together these consent zines that we have on hand at our show and also digitally for people to access and to read through. And the last thing we do is we make sure that at the end of scenes or at the end of the game as a whole, we allow players and staff to have a decompress, meaning that they can either talk to other players to express what they liked in a scene, what they didn't like in a scene. We make sure that we are accessible even during all the cleanup, even though it's 1 o'clock in the morning, to express what's going on. We just do everything we can to make it as available and make it as clear a conversation as to how we establish a confirmed consent and continue that forward. So the space that we have fought to protect, to make inclusive, to make safe, remains inclusive and safe for anyone of any diverse background, whether you have a disability, whether you are of a different gender or orientation identity, whether you're a different race and ethnicity, whatever that case is, we make sure we do everything we can in our consent doctrine to make you feel as included and safe as possible at our game.
Absolutely.
And I know that at certain other chapters and other orgs in the past, that was not a priority.
Absolutely. And I think that it's easy to mistake, in-game motivations for, it's just role-playing or whatever the case may be. But I think that any time that any players feel uncomfortable for any reason, that needs to be stopped. It doesn't matter, whatever the case may be. It's easy to pawn things off as one reason or another, but that's how these situations happen. Like that's how they get masked, and that's how these people have gotten away with it for so long, is that they can just say, oh, well, it was just in character or whatever, the blah, blah, blah. And I'm so glad to see organizations such as yours taking these extra steps, because it made this game get a bad reputation for a very, very long time. And I love this game. Like I've dedicated a lot of my life to this game, and I've created a talk show around this game and a server around this game. And like, obviously I want to see the best things for it, but it did have a very bad reputation for a long time. And I'm glad to see that it's coming back around and have become a positive and safe environment because of the steps that are being taken by organizations such as yours to prevent things like this from happening. But yeah.
I just have one more thing to build on top of that too. You'll experience this if you game with me at any of the conventions I'm at representing Gehenna Gaming, or even at City of Glass in the future for our tabletop section. Before our gaming begins, the first thing you do when you sit at that table, we present you a consent sheet that goes over all the various potential content warnings and trigger warnings that occur, and we have a red light, yellow light, and green light system. And we make sure that as your storyteller, as your GM, whatever the case is, that GM goes through each of those sheets and goes, okay, so my story can include this, but not that. For instance, a lot of players, a lot of people in many games don't want there to be any sort of animal cruelty, which is entirely valid. So if there's a table that like had a story that may have involved like a Call of Cthulhu-esque, hey, you have this like animal that is being transformed into something else. If a player redlines that, that's it. That we have to steer around and find a different way through that. If it is talking about sickness or illness, we have to find a way through that. If it's a yellow light, our storytellers and our GMs are trained to make sure they have a conversation with that player if a conversation is warranted, and to make sure that we avoid it, because prevention is just as important as intervention, right? And that's just one of the consent tools that, especially through Gehenna Gaming, that we have made sure to highlight in our other games going forward, especially within the narratives of horror. But not just horror, but you can extend to any game you're doing.
Absolutely. So now this question, and I do kind of want a little bit of an answer from each of you. What are some things that new players should look for when looking to join a LARP, and what is some advice you would give to new players joining a LARP? I know that's a little bit of a complicated question since most of you are very experienced LARPers at this point, storytellers, players alike. But what advice would you give to somebody who is a first-time LARPer, brand new, fresh-faced, joining a LARP for the first time? Because I know we've got several people who are going to GenCon, several people who are going to Darkness Emergent for the first time, people who are actually going to LARP experiences for their first time this year. What advice would you give them? Some people who might be trying to select a LARP for the first time. What advice would you give them in selecting a LARP or going to a LARP for the first time? And Arden, let's start with you. We'll just go down the line for each of you because I think I'd like to hear it from each of you because you might have differing perspectives.
Sure. So just so I'm clear, we're looking for advice.
Advice for a brand new, never LARPed before, first time person. Also in selecting a LARP too. So this could be someone who's LARPed before that might be trying to select a new LARP, but it could work for a brand new player too.
Oh boy. Should make a Ned's Declassified LARP Survival Guide.
It would help.
It would help. In terms of selecting a LARP, my first rule of thumb, I suppose, I do not have the specific rules that I've at least articulated. So I guess what I would be looking for is first a system that I enjoy, or a system that I'm interested in. The second thing is I would be looking for people or persons that are involved in that LARP or are attending the LARP that I have a acquaintanceship with, or a friendship with, because it's always a lot of fun. I don't want to say way more fun, but it is definitely can be more engaging to go to a LARP with peers of yours, with contemporaries, with friends. I would say that it's probably worth looking into any of the safety tools that we've kind of looked into, or that we talked about. Do the LARPs have those kind of front-facing in terms of your inclusion or your getting involved in the LARP? If that's very important to you, then is it as important to you as it is to them? I feel everyone would kind of say, don't hesitate to ask questions is always a big one for me. I mentioned earlier in the interview that on my first LARP, I didn't use any of my powers or my sheet because I had no idea how the system worked. And I know that it can kind of seem a lot because I've been in this situation, not just from a player's perspective, but also as the ST, to be in the situation to say, okay, well, I have a player walking up to me who doesn't understand the system, and how do I very quickly explain to them the system that is both genuine and earnest, but also doesn't make them feel like they're bothering me by asking me to answer these questions. Because there's a lot going on in a LARP, and you might feel intimidated to take an ST aside and be like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, or this is how I'm feeling. I don't really understand this, or what have you. And it's always good to just sit back on this side of the screen and say, don't hesitate to go talk to your ST about that. But like for the players, I hope you would feel encouraged to talk to your ST. And for the STs, I would encourage you and hope that you would feel comfortable to have those conversations and be open to having those conversations with your players, because that's going to make their enjoyment all the better. They're going to feel more comfortable in the space, and your retention of those players is going to be much higher if you're able to kind of have those breakdown conversations. So that was a lot of smaller things, all mixed up into one. But I would say overall, uh, have a friend, have a buddy, try your best to be comfortable asking questions or find ways to get those in if you're not that outspoken of a person. Because it's really not just on you to ask those questions or to feel comfortable to ask those questions, but from an ST's perspective, you really should be open to answering those questions. That's your player.
Yeah, absolutely. Collin.
So, to be also sensitive to the time and everything like that, of course, echoing everything that Arden said, if you don't have somebody that you're going into the game with, that you can sort of play off of, and generally speaking, if you're not used to being in a LARP and you're not an extroverted person who finds it very easy to slip into a character and to talk to people without like any issue, just jumping into conversations and things like that, then my suggestion would be to reach out to the LARP organizer, to speak to staff members, to get as much information about the possibility of your character as possible. So you are armed with as much information as you need in order to feel confident walking in with your character about your motivation, your objectives, your goals, and then, you know, kind of hardline whatever you think like the most important 1 to 2 task things that you need to accomplish during this LARP like are, and then like put that as like your beeline goals, because it's very easy. Everybody there is going to be trying to accomplish their goals, and it's going to draw their characters into conversations and things. And depending on how large the staff is, or how large the player base is, the staff's going to be very busy. It's easy to find yourself on the fringes of a LARP, feeling disjointed, disassociated, unable to interact because you just feel kind of locked out and you're not sure who to talk to, or you talk to the wrong person and like, I don't know how to help you. My character's not even connected to you. I don't know what to do. And you just feel more and more alienated till you just end up leaving, not having a great time. So the more information that you have, and then you just sort of press forward and then just keep pressing forward. The more questions you have, the more you inject yourself within like situations, circumstances, so that the other players know you, know to ask about you, know to recognize you, the more that they include you within their stories. And then an important piece of information that I have, apart from your goals that you're hardlining, make room for sub goals, and they're not even your sub goals. Make them another player's sub goals. Find another player, take their goals, make them your goals. It'd probably be best if they also kind of align with your goals. Don't take something that goes completely against your goals. That would be weird. But like, find something that at least sort of aligns with your main goals and make them entirely that other player's goals. That is your ally now. Make that player's goals like part of your mantra, because that reciprocation that you have, they will hopefully also then play into your goals. And then you could find another person that builds into that way. And by building that web, they will pull you into their story as you pull them into yours. And that will embed you within the story so much better. Everybody just wants their story to kind of be drawn into closure, for their story and their voice to matter. If you make their voice matter, they'll make your voice matter as well. So that's, generally speaking, my best advice.
Absolutely. Erik.
So I'll approach it from the storyteller perspective, because Arden and Collin really covered like a lot of the player ideal first. So from our organizational and storytelling perspective, for instance, again, GenCon's our biggest one, right? We make sure that we have, when that catalog goes live, that our accessibility by email, for instance, is open and honest. We have a Discord where new players can join in if they're joining in from friends or like have just found us from a different social, whatever the case is. And they can, once they join, we set them up with a personal chat to be able to talk about a player concept they may have. Or we start off with like a splat idea. Do you want to play a vampire, shifter, mage, changeling, right? And we try to establish some cutoff dates as like when those can happen, because certain splats require a certain amount of detail to their bio. A changeling bio is much different than a vampire bio, right? So we try to make sure that as new players, we are as friendly as possible. We allow them to be excuse me. We allow them to be as accessible to our other players in the community to get an idea of people they may generally want to vibe with, or characters that they may like, or just pitch and float concepts to one another, right? We make sure that as storytellers and as narrators, that we are primed to look at that information they're giving us and to sculpt the bio from that. And as Collin mentioned earlier, our bios include also slews of contacts that people can talk to. We include a blurb as to why that contact, you may have heard of them, why they may be important to you, why they may be a nemesis or the best ally you've had as well. We make sure our goals will also pertain to what that is. And what we do in our bios is we actually like bold out what is there to pay attention to, is like, oh, it's this name. Oh, it's this thing you're looking for. To give them those hints and ideas of like where to go with other players, to go, I'm looking for the Book of Nod, right? We bold that out in your bio. You know what you're looking for. You find other players that may be potential contacts, like a bookseller who's like a mage, or someone who's scoured the deep umbra like a werewolf. We are not afraid to build that intersplat connectivity, both antagonistically and also like kind of mutually. Um, at the show itself, at our LARP, we also make sure and ask that all of our adjudicators and our narrators look to the wall specifically to pull those wallflowers off the wall to see, oh, can I get a look at your bio? Can we maybe think about a thing you could do? Oh, I got a scene happening here that's happening in the hallway. Oh, you want to be involved with this thing. Oh, I got this player over here. And like they will literally just kind of form that introduction for you if you are too shy to get involved. If you have had a negative interaction with another player, and you step into another player and go, hey, like I didn't really like this with this player, like is it okay if I pal with you? That's totally fine. If they want to go to a narrator or storyteller or adjudicator and go, hey, I had a bit of a negative interaction with this, then we know, okay, like oil and water, okay, maybe not this player with this player. We'll try to figure out where we can pilot those two players, so maybe never that shall the two meet until we can have a bigger conversation about what happened, right? And to get those new players involved, we try to make things as easily readable. The pre-generated characters, we had tried it in previous years within our first and second chronicle, and we didn't have as much success with it. But as the space has grown, as LARP has grown, as post-pandemic has grown us, we found that those pre-generated characters that maybe have more generic bios, but at least have the goals outlined and like the factions they're aligned to, have more easily let themselves play to, okay, I'm with Sarah Boss is saying, I'm with Evander's Kingdom. We have established packs for the Sabbat. I'm with the Southeast. You already have your baseline overarching connection as to where you can go. And what that allows us as storytellers, as narrators, assigning certain players and staffers to those sections, we now have an identity of like, okay, who's with this pack? Who am I building this story for? And I want to highlight something that Arden did at the Boston LARP last year. That was possibly the biggest stroke of, yeah, it's you, possibly the biggest stroke of genius. He literally, on our stuffing parties, we call it, where we put all the envelopes together of like your bio, your sheet, your tickets, and everything, made a mission board that was accessible to every player to access a mission that had an objective, what it was for, who it would affect, and their reward for it. And we were able to build these packs that you could, as a pack leader, for instance, establish, okay, I'm going to give this to you guys to do with this. This is the narrator or adjudicator that can go. And we would have 4 or 5 people go with that. When you have a LARP that has 50, 60 vampire players, piecing off 5, 6, 7, 8 at a time is a big deal that solves a lot of the problems and gets a lot of people involved and increases that investment. So suddenly, when there are no more missions on the board, now these cities established, people have their conflict lines drawn. And now they have their territories that they can fight over. And now they have their different plots they want to advance personally. Or it at least allows them to play in spaces that get interaction from other like key big players, and now they're not afraid to go to them anymore. So the biggest advice that we can give to new players is simply do not be afraid to get involved. Do not be afraid to ask our experienced players, because they are all incredibly friendly, as to help with an ability, with a plot, and whatever the case that is. And I realized that was a lot of word salad. So I'm going to pitch it off to actually the most important person for that question conversation, which is Brent.
Brent, go.
Way to throw the spotlight on me. Okay. Selecting a LARP, I feel like all of the points I would hit already have, but to surmise them again, if you know somebody already playing there, having that connection, especially if you have the social anxiety, that makes a world of difference. System that you are familiar with or want to learn about, that's super important. And safety tools, those are the big things. The three that would be at the top of my list. As a new person to LARP, the things I would say to people is, first and foremost, as a new player, or if you're engaging, don't be afraid to fail. You are not the protagonist. There is something really to be said for having your character go up and taking a big swing at somebody that they think they can take, and then it discovers like, oh no, they're way more powerful than everybody realized. And that's like a curtain pull, or like, it's a character develop moment. You now have an adversary. It's like a way to engage, and then like other people can be like, oh man, that guy just fucked up that guy. Well, he was going after my adversary, so maybe I should team up with him. Or like, it not everything has to be a success to be interesting. And like, after the LARPs, when everyone's decompressing, when everybody's chilling, some of the best stories are when people fail and we all sit around and laugh about it. Like it's just fun and interesting to be like, yeah, man, I took that big swing and fell right on my ass, but it was fucking hilarious.
So I'm going to actually throw in my hat in the ring here too, for a few things that weren't mentioned as I attended Darkness Emergent, and a few things that weren't mentioned. One, comfortable shoes is a huge thing I recommend to everyone who attends a LARP. Yes, your outfit might be amazing and beautiful, and you might want to wear stilettos, you might want to wear fancy dress shoes. It sounds a lot better on paper than the reality of this situation is. You are probably going to be standing for long periods of time. Seating might be at a minimum. You never know. You never know the situation. That brings it up to the next point. Dress in layers. You don't know what scenario you're walking into. The room might be too cold. It is likely, more than likely, going to be too hot because there are going to be lots and lots of bodies packed into a far too small room. And they are all going to be breathing on you. So it is going to be very, very hot in the room. You are going to be stripping off your nice cloak that you brought, and your overcoat, and your double-breasted suit, and your whatever over time, unless you want to be sweating bullets. So definitely bring in layers. Wear deodorant, please. For the love of God, wear deodorant. And take a shower before you go to the event. And, please consider other people as far as your overall hygiene is concerned. Definitely knowing people is a good thing. Doing your research before you go is a good thing. If it's your first time going to an event and it is a create a character thing, I would always say create a simple character first. Don't create some complicated, over-the-top character, especially if you don't know the setting. Go to your first event, learn the setting, and then go to your second event with knowledge of the setting and create a more complicated character with knowledge of the setting that you can ingratiate into the setting. Because if you try to create some character that doesn't gel well with the setting, you might feel put out, or you might be told it doesn't go well, or that doesn't make sense, and then you feel uncomfortable and you get pushed out, and it's off-putting. So those are just some things I've learned from my experiences, but definitely dress comfortably, bring bottles of water, like prepare yourself, because you don't know what they're going to supply. If you make assumptions, you're usually wrong. Like, you're wrong in almost all of those assumptions. You don't know if there's going to be a water fountain nearby. You don't know what the bathroom situation's going to be. There might be lines for the bathroom. There might be like, just be prepared. Use that Girl Scout, Boy Scout, them Scout motto of be prepared. Like, have your comfortable shoes, have changes of clothes, have bags to store stuff in. Like, be ready. Like, we were sweating in a ballroom at our first Darkness Emergent with nowhere to sit and feet hurting and a lot of things going on, and it was awful. It was a wonderful event, but it was just, if you weren't prepared, it was awful. So just be prepared. The staff is wonderful, but you got to be prepared for yourself, because nobody is going to take care of you. You have to take care of yourself physically. Nobody's going to take care of you physically. You have to take care of yourself physically. They'll take care of you for the game, but you have to take care of yourself physically.
Do you mind if I piggyback?
Please do, by all means.
Because we've talked about, I think you brought up an excellent point in terms of like dressing comfortably, and I know something that came up a lot during like the preamble for Boston was folks talking about their costumes and wanting to get their character down so they can start working on their costumes or whatever. And I know Erik had mentioned at one point I had a costume for my NPC in NOLA. Don't feel obligated to put yourself out to match the energy of somebody else at the LARP. Just because I'm running around for whatever reason in a full like crusader garb does not mean that you have to do the same. Don't feel like you have to match the energy. Bring the energy that you are willing to put in, because that will always be given back to you. Just don't feel obliged to match somebody else's energy. Be you.
I'm almost
comfortable.
never in costume because I'm too many NPCs. I don't know which one to be, and I can't do fast costume changes.
And he doesn't like hats, so like what?
Right, exactly.
No, absolutely. But also, to Brent's point, you get out of it what you put into it too. So if you want to dress up, like, dress up. People will comment on your clothes, and you'll get attention. That's a good way to get people to talk to you, is if you do put in a good costume. That's great, but it's not required. People will also talk to you if you don't, so don't feel obligated. It's just what level of enjoyment you want is up to you. There's no wrong answer. It's up to you. But if you're going to a game with a pre-gen character, ask the staff if you can get the character in advance. If you want to get a costume for that character, see if you can get their backstory and dress to the character, because that might bring an extra pizzazz to the game. If you want to do that, if you want to get some extra conversation out of it or something, those are all things that you can do to kind of spice up the experience. But yes, please dress comfortably. My God, like, I got blisters on my feet from the event. It was a huge mistake. Just comfortably. Oh my God. But yes, moving on to the next question. How do you track character actions, consequences, and secrets during the event? Because again, we're talking like 30, 40, 60, 100 people. And sure, maybe for a one-day character, that's not as much of a deal. But for a 3-day character, or people who are returning for all 3 years, that does become something to consider. How do you guys go about doing that?
I'm actually really excited about this. So, in the lead up for Boston, I was privileged enough as a storyteller to have 3 narrators and then 2 more adjudicators. So the vampire staff was very flush, which is never something you see at a LARP. But we had quite a few. I had a lot of support. And one of the things that we worked on together was, as I was writing bios and as my narrators assisted me in writing of bios, we had player notes, like specific little things. Maybe somebody had like a special power that didn't have like an actual like mechanical already pre-established situation. So we put that in their player notes, or something specific like there's one character who's on a specific Sabbat path, and there's a kind of a supernatural phenomena that follows them or whatever. That would be in their player notes. And I had a master document, a master sheet that we printed off and had in a binder on the table at our event at GenCon, that not only could our staff at any time look and kind of know and figure out, okay, when this player is asking me about this thing, I have a note about it here that I can reference back to. And obviously that's also available to all of our staff on our staff Google Drive, that monstrosity. But also something that it was Collin or Erik, it was one of the two of them who came up with, we have our front desk kind of position in our staff that is headed or has been headed by our friend Mal, my brother Mal, who has a notebook throughout the entirety of the event. Anything that happens, a storyteller, a narrator, an adjudicator, a player does something, interacts some way or shape or form, we go to Mal and say, "Hey, I need this note taken for our later debrief, so that the STs we can kind of keep track of all these things, and then we load that into another document, digitize it when we get the chance to after the LARP." But it's a master document, and it was a master stroke to get somebody present to always be taking the notes for the entire LARP. That every ST, that every narrator, every staff member is finishing out a scene, debriefing with the folks from that scene, and then kind of scurrying over to Mal, checking with Mal, saying, "This is kind of what happened. What's next in the queue? Who's looking for me?" And then running off to do that next thing so we can refer back to it. Because there's so much happening. It's go, go, go all the time. So having kind of a repository of information that we can look back on once we get a second to breathe is invaluable.
Well, that actually brings up my next question. What tools like spreadsheets, apps, whiteboards do you use behind the scenes? Because it sounds like you've got this master document, but what other kinds of tools do you have at your disposal?
We've used like PowerPoint before. Arden's influence presentation, reworking influences. We continue to rework influence. We use Google Docs. We have a drive where we keep things. We use Sheets, lots of different kind of trackers. I'm using personally using Asana right now to like keep some of my project pieces organized. For resource trackers, we use tickets, like little raffle tickets right now, where we're to represent blood, gnosis, willpower, all of the kinds of various supernatural pieces. The storytellers have like a little game every year where we see who can collect the most tickets. Basically, I stopped winning that after it at some point in time.
You stopped winning after I came on board.
That's basically.
Shouldn't have put it on our radar.
We use note cards. We use note cards for text messages. Since you write down something, you can hand it to somebody for a text message. We also use the same thing for active spells. You go up to the mage storyteller, something like that, chop for the spell, they'll write it down and like put on, like if it's only active for like a scene or something, put like maybe like a little like stamp or like sign on it. They'll go in, show it to the scene person before the scene starts. Hey, it starts like, hey, I've got this spell active, so you know what's going on for that. And afterwards, if the spell's like done, they'll cross it out so they can go and have to chop forward it again. That way you know what's active on the mages that are coming in for things like that, so we can keep these things kind of tracked from like place to place to place as they kind of go. Same thing for changelings and stuff like that, for extended spells, things, vampires that have like stuff active that people don't know, because we've got, not all the staff members have complete competency in every single rule set. We usually want every staff member to have at least a somewhat competency in at least 2 sets of rules, but that might not be changeling for whatever matter. And so like comes in and they're like, oh, what's autumn eyes for whatever, and like you gotta explain what it is, and they can like show you that like, oh, I've got this thing active basically. And then some of it also, when you're marking it off your sheet, you can come in and then get like that erased off the next night or whatever, when you get your traits refreshed. Some of it is honor system. Fortunately, we've got a pretty good community on that basis. But if you want more resources, your raffle tickets, you'll have to go to the front desk, vie with Mal, you have to explain to him why you're coming back and getting those tickets. And if Storyteller isn't given like a thumbs up for that, then he's like, no, I'm afraid I'm not handing you more glamour or blood. Or you'll have to do a scene or something with him. But we use all kinds of things behind the scenes to try to keep ourselves like on track and organized. Sometimes it's individual per staff member, whatever helps to keep them on track. But at least we keep as much of our stuff together. And Erik, for mid-year, between years, recording and stuff, you utilize a lot of other things too.
Yeah. To touch on what we also do in development, we also have a contacts tracker, or at least we had one until like we became too big that it became harder. That is literally every single character we have written out pre-gen or currently slated, and then going down each of those characters repeated, and we try to mark off the X of like, okay, this is how many characters is connected with, and like we find the cross section, make sure everyone has like at least 5 that they're crossing with. That way there's variability so players can like interact with multitudes of people, not just, oh, you're the one guy I have this entire session, that's it. We also have a full tracker of our status of where we are on writing our bios, being a status of concept formed, bio started, character sheet started, because like our storytellers will operate as, oh, I make the bio from the character sheet, or oh, I make the sheet from the bio, and then make sure we have like a green light system for it to be approved. Collin does a lot of reading in the inter-year to make sure the bios make sense, flow with the plot, and we aren't like writing, oh, I'm the space fighter from, you know, a different planet entirely, and I have like a huge Admiral Starfleet with me. It's like, let's tone it down, bud.
I read everything to make sure all the plot lines interconnect.
He also makes sure to give us
Everything.
compliments so that way we feel inspired to continue to write more. It's a great system. And then in the interior, like Collin mentioned, literally I will make an audio recording. We have a voice chat reservation area that players will request voice chats with us or to run scenes in. And we will always make sure that someone is available there either as a player or as a storyteller, narrator, adjudicator to record down that voice scene. They then give that file to me, or I already have it on hand. I put it to our drive, I date it, I mark down who is in that, and go from there. For our staff stuff, we make sure that we record all of our staff meetings. So that way you don't have to jockey with writing down all the notes. If you have to go back and listen to the recording to make sure you had one key thing that you hit on that maybe was like a floating idea or you lost, it's there. And the last thing we kind of do as a fun player resource and as a fun storyteller resource in that same vein of audio is sometimes we'll make some fun files to really screw with a player one way or the other. There, if you go to Star Shard Stories TikTok, you can see some of that audio work in play where literally my NPC was given them phone calls to try to entice them into the next setting or to give that little bit of a torture. That way players and outside players could, yeah, as I see them responding in the chat, that way players feel immersed to engage not just at the LARP, but also they are feeling immersed within the character creation process.
That's amazing.
And then as far as like our last thing we really try to keep track of, we mentioned the front desk system. It wasn't just so the players knew to write down what happened that scene, so we had a tracker for our debrief, but we also make sure we keep a track of storyteller has an order of what person and what scene they have to get to next. That way, if a player wants to like interact with a particular NPC, say it's Collin playing King Maelge in NOLA, there was an established order as to who to go through and who to get to. It also gave us an idea of like what our time blindness is, because when you're running a LARP with 100 people, it's very easy to get lost into one scene for 2.5 hours, and suddenly you're off the board. So we make sure we also tap each other on the shoulder, be like, hey, listen, you gotta get to this thing, or hey, listen, I need you for this thing. Like, let's establish a time and go. And we will also make sure in our Discord and our staff chats that if we have a big scene planned at any point in the night, we establish a time point. We tell our front desk what that time point is. If it's 9:45 to set up the Leviathan thing, and then we hit our note and we go.
I'm so sorry. I wanted to cut back in and gush for just
How
a
dare.
second. So, in terms of other elements, with the advent of 5th edition and the growing of the new community surrounding this genre and surrounding this game, one thing that was brought to my attention and that I noticed was that the Sabbat, particularly as a faction, as a sect, have kind of taken not so much like a back seat, but they're very much, they have a role to play in the greater narrative that is trying to be currently written. And so when we set off to write Boston, one thing that was very much in my head was that I wanted to run a Sabbat game. I wanted to play with the Sabbat. They're very interesting to me, and I think it's rife with really interesting storytelling. But since we're in this new age with 5th edition, not a lot of people are playing Sabbat games. The game itself, 5th edition, isn't tailored towards Sabbat-centric games.
No.
There's not a lot of content. So, but there's so much of it in Old World, and it's so different in comparison. So one thing that I wanted to do going into Boston, knowing that it was going to be very Sabbat heavy, and for a lot of new players who have maybe stepped into Vampire the Masquerade via 5th edition, myself and my narrators took a great deal of time and created these binders full of content that was, we went back into the old books, we stripped out as much of the fluff as we possibly could to just be like, hey, this is the Sabbat. This
Crash course on Sabbat.
Crash course on Sabbat. These are the retie. These are the factions within the Sabbat, little blurbs. These are the NPCs that you're going to be dealing with primarily. One of the things that I really enjoyed was, because there's such a huge dynamic for the Sabbat with the pack, with their group, their small little like groups that they make up, was coming up with the pack sheets. So every time when we created the packs for Boston, I was like, okay, here's the pack of vampires. I write all of those vampires. And then when I hand out all of those vampires at game, I also hand them a pack sheet where they can record all of the information, all of the nitty gritty specific things that like makes their pack feel unique and individual. And it's completely however they want to create it. It's, you know, do they have pack influences that they share amongst the pack? Where's their haven? What's their heraldry? What's their code signs? Like all of these different things to really let the players dig their teeth into like really that creation aspect of it, and also take a load off of me. Oh my god, if I was there creating 16 different packs, that would have been so much. But we have all of that information, and if anyone wants any of that information, I don't know where I would post it, but we have all of that just set and ready to go. Just bite-sized informations that you can just take for running, particularly Sabbat, because that's what we're doing at the moment.
So my next question, and I want to kind of wrap things up here because I've already kept you gentlemen way longer than I intended to. Speaking of timing and how easy it is to get lost in conversations, how many staff members does it typically take to run one of your Gen Con games? Because I've heard of narrators, I've heard of front desk people, I'm hearing about people taking tickets at the door and stamping and like all these things, and I'm like, you have to have like 30 people running your game. Like who's playing at this point? Like you've got so many volunteers and all these people. Like, so how many people do you have volunteering and running the games? And that's amazing, one, that you get all these people to run the games, and how great of a community you've got to have all these people who volunteer and work and do these things. But yeah, like how many people are there typically running a game?
So that's kind of scaled as time has gone on, and it sort of fluctuates depending on, you know, people's bandwidth and availability. But it's great because I wanted to give a shout out to all of the folks that kind of help make our game a reality. Especially for like our storytelling staff, like Ryan, who was working, couldn't be here tonight, but is basically helped out since was there with San Fran. And then our new storyteller that'll be joining us this year, Alan, who's moving up from a narrator position. And our narrators, well, obviously our other storytellers got Arden, Erik, of course, and then our narrators, we've got Lily, Nate, Jess, Josh, Kat, and Briggs. Narrators are basically so we've got difference between narrators and adjudicators is narrators are primarily more storyteller based than they are player based. They usually have a major NPC or two that are attributed to them that they will be primarily playing just for the sake of consistency, and then also they are assigned under at least one primary splat to sort of like assist strongly with, and then they also run like feeding scenes or like musing scenes, can also help to run seekings and things like that. They're sort of like on the fast track up into storyteller, but they focus primarily on like a specific splat or a specific plot that they're running with. And then we've got our adjudicators. We got Chloe and Sarah, Maddie and Allure. And our adjudicators are actually they're primarily players. They don't really see behind the curtain so much. They still get the player experience, but they are trusted by the staff to be able to adjudicate in matters of like combat when a narrator or a storyteller can't make it over, kind of tied up in a scene or anything. But we are able to trust them to like step out and be like, okay, so I know the rules enough, and I've been kind of certified within like the rules so that I can adjudicate within this combat, or I could run a feeding scene or something like that for you, something that's small, kind of low risk, low impact within the story that can get you the resources and the things that you need, just so that you're not waiting, and you can basically spin you back out into the game itself. But they can still have the player experience and roll with the rest of the game that's going. And then of course we've got Yvonne, who's helping with kind of front desk admin, Mal, Pierce, and then M, who's hitting with our social media. So like these are all like members of the community that like to step up and help us out with like a number of things that we've got going on. And as we kind of get bigger and our events get like larger, we've got all of this stuff that opportunities. Every time after GenCon, we put out call outs for those that are interested in stepping up, whether that be in a minor role as an adjudicator or a larger role in narrator and things like that. And then we'll hold interviews and kind of see how that sort of shakes out.
I should have been counting, but I'm guessing that was around 15 or so.
It was about 21, and
21,
there's one more set that we forgot that has also been very important for the last couple of years, which is our bake team. Literally, we've had a team of players within the last couple of years that have stepped forward to actually make baked goods for the LARP as a whole, because it's important to recharge when you're at the game, and that goes out to Natalie and John, and to Maddie and to Vinny.
I always forget to eat, so
I'm going to tell you to all the new people out there, most games do not have food. So do not take what they're doing. This is a wonderful thing they do that most games do not do. Most games do not have food, but they do. So that's wonderful. But feed yourselves before you go to games, or bring your own food. But that's amazing. Man, that's amazing. Wow.
Seriously, huge shout out to our community. We could not do this game without our players, obviously, and those that step up and volunteer. It's huge help, and your creativity is fantastic.
The last question I'm going to ask you before we start getting into the rapid fire questions, lightning round, and we wrap this thing up. If someone wanted to start a LARP, what would you advise them to do to get started? So they've been playing for a while. They want to kind of start building their own situation. Maybe locally, they want to start a local game in their, city or their neighborhood, or, something like that. What would they need to get started as people who've been doing this for a long, long time? What should they start with? Ground floor.
Okay. Well, I mean, from my perspective, I think that primarily what you would need is a sense of scope, right? You need your bare minimum. Where are you going to have it? What's your story going to be? And then like what's the scope for the story? Is this a bi-weekly game? Is this a monthly game? Is this a bi-monthly game? What kind of system are you using? And then how big is it going to be? You need a group of staff that you can trust, unless you're running it on your own. I don't know what the scale is on the game that you're doing, but once you can kind of nail the structural details, then your focus is simply outreach. Do you have a gaming group that you can outreach through? Do you have another LARP community that you can gather other players from that you trust, that you like their style, that you think the community is healthy enough to gather other people from? And then really from there, it's just putting it together and then basically sticking it. Proof of concept, I usually kind of go like rule of thumb. If you can make 3 to 4 sessions happen without missing it, without it falling apart, then usually you've got enough of a concept that it's going to build. 3 to 4, if you can have it, that's enough momentum for it to start moving. And that's the good benchmark, that if we've got it going and that it's consistent enough to have the 3 to 4 to start building up lore, to start building up consistency, people have put it in their schedules, people know to expect it, then we've got it going on. Then you just have to worry about how you pace your story and how you keep people interested and how you keep your staff motivated for the entirety.
I would say start small, to piggyback off of that. We talked about in crafting the story, kind of starting with the macros and then working micro. That's for story. For the LARP itself, for starting to build that community, I would say start small. You've probably heard that we have in excess of 100 or so folks at our LARPs. Don't start there. Don't start with 100-person LARP. It's a lot of work, and I would hate for someone who has the passion, who has the drive and the energy to like look at this and be like, oh, I want to do that, and then try to hit that 100-person LARP mark for their first time of running a LARP and then get burnt out. Start small. Start with that small, tight group, and then start to build from there. As long as you have that foundation, you can continue to build and you can continue to bounce back, even if a plane doesn't land the way you want it to.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. When I launched this server, I thought I was going to have 30 people. I had 90 people show up to the first event, and I was the only storyteller. So yeah, I totally understand. It was a thing. So yeah, I remember. Make no assumptions, I would say. Don't assume you're going to have a bunch of people show up, because then you're going to have nobody show up, or don't assume nobody's going to show up, because then you're going to have a bunch of people show up. So always always just assume nothing. Assume nothing.
I guess it comes down to what I would say, which is more of the admin side, which is do your marketing research. That is, Collin alluded to it a little bit, which is like talk to or be involved within your local gaming communities, be involved within that local convention scene. Really identify what kind of niche you're trying to hit, right? If you want to play a vampire game, there may be 100 different Camarilla games, but there may only be 2 Anarch games or 1 Sabbat game. Figure out like what is a story that you want to tell, or what is the type of market that you want to serve, or just generally what's the thing you wish you could play, right? There's so much out there for Vampire and so much out there for Shifter in particular, but outside of really within the last few years, there was a major thing that happened in Atlantic City, which is a gigantic changeling LARP from back in 2016, 2017 that not a lot of people remember, but they knew what they wanted to hit, right? So they knew exactly the audience that they were trying to attract. The second thing about that too, especially with convention side games, if you're going to charge, make sure you figure out what the right price point is to either help you break even or help you to build. For instance, we've kept our price at $12 per ticket for around about 9 years. We only increased our price by a whopping total of $4. And this is the first year that we're doing a $16 LARP. And that's just to help us make sure that we are able to fund our big team, that we're able to support all the materials that we have to go into it, because you should never go bankrupt trying to start a thing you want to enjoy. but you also shouldn't be trying to start off at, let me sell these LARP tickets for $200. Because are you really serving that? And do people even have that money these days, right? And the other thing is too, is make sure you're taking a keynote look at what type of community is around you, right? You want to make sure that you're servicing the players on a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different backgrounds. You want to make sure that you are hitting either a convention crowd and you know what type of game you have to scope for a convention crowd, or you're starting a LARP in your basement with 10 of your friends and you want to make sure that you are hitting upon those notes that you want to be able to grow with, right? Like Arden said, you don't have to, nor should you ever feel the need to start with 100 people. It took us 12 years to get there. We had a lot of years where there were only 30 or 40 people. We've gone through having a big space in the Illinois Street Ballroom at GenCon to going downstairs and then fighting our way back to be the organization that we are now, an organization that we're proud of and that we can service as many of our players as possible. And probably the last part about it too is be honest with what your commitment can be. If you are working 2 jobs, maybe it's best you don't try to host a LARP every week in your local bar. Maybe you do that once a quarter. Maybe you do that twice a year. And don't be afraid to venue scout to do something interesting. Like I said, a lot of these parlor LARPs started in bars, started in small community town halls, rec centers, and like that. Don't be afraid to start there. Don't be afraid to start in your local park. Don't be afraid to start in your basement. Just make sure that whatever you're doing is respective to that space you have, and make sure the crowd you are attracting are also respective of that space you have. You don't want someone to come and trash your house, and certainly no one wants you to come and trash their business.
Absolutely. Great advice. Great advice. So I'm going to ask you a couple of lightning round questions. These are going to be just like really simple, very short answers. And then we're going to have you guys plug some stuff, and then we're going to put a bow on this thing. Gentlemen, you have been amazing guests. I'm so sorry to have taken extra time, but I couldn't stop talking. You guys have said so many amazing things, and this has been so informative. But first
I'm having a
off,
great time. It's only been like an hour, right?
yeah,
It feels like it.
First off,
I don't know. We don't have a front desk admin tell us what time it is.
Right, exactly. First, I'm going to ask you, one of the things that World of Darkness is renowned for is its use of metaplot. Metaplot was such a huge part of old World of Darkness that new, like 5th edition, has kind of been vague about whether they're going to use or not use. Because sometimes they use it, especially in their use of lore sheets, and then sometimes they're like, no, we're getting rid of it, and they completely disregard it. But then it comes back, and it's unsure of what part it's going to play anymore. In your opinion, metaplot, yes or no? Is it worthwhile? Is it not? Is it something that you consider important in your games? Or is it, and this could be your table games or in your LARPs, up to you. But I want to know, for your own personal opinion, metaplot, do you appreciate it or do you not, Arden? And you can give a short answer, 1-sentence answer if you need to explain, but we're going to try to avoid diatribes for the sake of time.
For the sake of time. I think that there is a respect that we give to metaplot, especially in the crafting of our own narratives. So with that, I would say, yes, there is a respect to be given to metaplot, but it at the end of the day, it kind of just comes down to you as the player or as the storyteller and what the story is that you want to tell.
Okay, Collin.
I think it's useful as a framing device and as an interesting reference point to bring in those that are familiar with the game, that are seeking something familiar to set themselves as an anchor against, but not something to restrain you as chains, simply something to inspire you.
Okay, Erik.
I famously have never read a World of Darkness book in my entire life, the entire way through. I just get snippets of the rules and what I think I need, and that's it. The meta plot certainly has a space depending upon where you want to go, but do not be afraid to throw your own shit on the wall and make something happen.
And Brent.
Absolutely metaplot. Love it. More lore, the better, lore hound. But remember, there is the meta plot and World of Darkness in the books, and then there's the World of Darkness that you're running at your game. They are similar, but they are different.
So obviously D&D had its classes, vampire has its clans, werewolf has its tribes, mage has its houses. I'm going to put you all on the spot of picking one out of all of the World of Darknesses, all of the splats of your favorite. What is your favorite World of Darkness thing? Clan, tribe, house. You can only pick one. So it's out of all of the splats. I'm not saying pick one per splat. I'm saying out of all of the splats. You can only pick one. Arden, go.
Clan La Sombra. Not even close. Clan La Sombra.
Why? One sentence answer.
Because the dichotomy between Clan La Sombra and Clan Ventru is such a good narrative for me. And also, I love shadows. I'm the edgelord in our staff. I'm the edgy boy.
You did put up Tenebration as your favorite discipline, so I
I can go so hard with some Tenebration.
Collin.
Oh man, that's difficult. Shoot. Out of everything too.
I know it's a hard question. I was gonna
Just
go
have
one
all
by
of those
one, but we're trying to make it
brain.
lightning.
I know. And you're gonna try, and you were gonna make it lightning out of it. So I'm just gonna have to pick real quick out of things.
I'm gonna count you down, Collin, in a second.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. I'm gonna go at. I think I'm gonna go ahead and say the Hermetics.
Okay.
They are really fun to cast as villains, and I think that their magic has a lot of both flexible variability and also familiarity within various occultisms and mythologies that pivots in a way that I really like.
Okay. Erik.
It is the Ghost Council from W5 specifically that we have moved over to the old world because we'd rather not use slurs for our new for our setting. A big reason for that is James F. Sembrano made a wonderful essay. They were one of the writers for W5 that dissected the elder brother and younger brother tribes, and I really enjoyed looking at that from a perspective of culture, being indigenous myself. Even though I'm separated from my tribe, which is the Pueblo Apache. And what I love about it is they are the Umbral jailers, and I feel that there are not near enough stories told within the scope of the Umbral Wardens and Umbral jails and how interesting that can be because you always bring it back to the Skinlands and you don't spend enough time there.
That's amazing. Brent.
Well, as a descendant of Cassandra, I'm going to have to say Malkavian. And the reason why is because lean in here real quick. I fucking love saying I told you so.
Okay. So then this is the big next one, and I know some of you have some insight, so this might be a spoiler or a prediction instead of a guessing game.
Paul Heyman?
Hey, there you go. What's coming next? Because we've seen Vampire come out, we've seen Hunter come out, we've seen Werewolf come out in 5th edition. What's next? There are some guesses that it could be Mage. There are some hopes that it could be Wraith or Changeling. What is World of Darkness working on? We're surprised, or there has been some surprise that there isn't been a big splat announced so far. Usually they've been doing one per year, but we haven't gotten one yet for 2025. So what is next? What are we waiting on? What is the next big release? I want to hear your guesses. Arden.
I want to say Changeling just because I am a huge fan of Changeling. I think that would be such a treat to see how they approach that with 5th edition and integrating that. It would also be such a it's such a juxtaposition in terms of the vibes between vampire, hunter, and werewolf. I would love to see Changeling be brought into the modern zeitgeist. That'd be sick.
Collin.
I wish it was Changeling, but my guess is it's going to be Mage, and the only reason that it's taking a while is because it's going to be kind of hard to deal with Mage.
I agree. Erik.
I'm not allowed to answer.
You're not allowed to answer. Fair enough. That's fair. I know. Yeah, we talked a little bit about it beforehand, and you were the one that I know had some insight into it, so I will not pressure you on that. Brent.
My heart says mage, but my mind says that mage is going to be last because they're the most powerful. And the brain says that I think it's going to be changeling because that seems market wise the share of if we're going to line them up logically, that would be the next one if they want it to be successful, because we're probably never going to see Mummy. Promethean would be really cool, but we're probably not going to see that for a decade. So logically, I think it's got to be Changeling next.
Now, with the push for Changeling, and Changeling has always been kind of, in my mind, a cult classic. It wasn't the same level of obviously a vampire or a mage or a werewolf. Those were the three pillars of World of Darkness. I know that there has been, I never really got into Changeling, but I'm based off of the love for it, I'm kind of getting interested. The Lost or the Dreaming? I've heard a lot of love for the Lost, and I've seen that V5 or 5th edition has been starting to incorporate some of the new World of Darkness stuff, whether it's mechanics or otherwise, into what they've been doing with 5th edition. So is it possible that they could just do away with the old lore and decide to take in the Lost instead? Or are they just going to go with the Dreaming, which is also fine? Which would you prefer, Arden?
Changeling the Lost was my first non-tabletop game, my first non-LARP game that I ran with Collin as my ST. And I have such a love for Changeling the Lost. Changeling the Dreaming has a cool vibe. It's interesting, but there's something very intimate. And I think actually it makes a lot of sense for them to kind of move in the direction of Changeling the Lost, because that seems, I don't know, VTM5, V5, W5, and Hunter 5 seems very street level. Seems very intimate, talking about like the personal stories of these
Justin
characters.
Achille, when we had him on the show, he actually said that was the intention, was to make it more about the personal story versus the world story. So yeah.
So then I would give it to Changeling the Lost, just because it's so integral to the Lost. Personally.
Collin.
I think in terms of the comparison between Dreaming and The Lost, I think it's easier to capture some of the themes of horror that you find so readily accessible within Vampire 5th edition, probably. In Lost, I think you at first glance might have to dig a little bit to get into Dreaming. I think that's why it didn't catch on quite as much, because you have to dig a little bit to find some of the really horrifying elements that are embedded within Dreaming itself, because just on the surface it doesn't seem to project quite as much of that, but it's definitely there. It's just Lost, I think, might viscerally have a little bit more of that on the surface. So pivoting towards that would maybe align it a little bit more with that same kind of grungy, dark feeling.
Erik.
I think I would prefer to see The Lost because, like what was mentioned, a lot of that personal horror aesthetic, bringing it back down to a street level. While there are complaints in the 5th ed systems about like there being no lore, which is also false to say, I'm just gonna
I agree.
flat out say that.
It is false.
Like it's there. Just like be honest with yourself. That's just simply not something you want to look at because you're looking at your old stuff, right? But I want to say Changeling the Lost in part because that horror narrative that you're able to seek out a lot of your personal stories with. And just the idea of there being this like otherworldly entity that you are either subservient to because you've broken away from it. And I love chase stories. I love them.
Awesome. And Brent.
Admittedly, I've only ever had a chance to like read some of the stuff from Changeling, so I'm not exactly tapped in, but I am going to, say the Lost. But I'm hopeful from what I've read that they're going to kind of chop up bits of the Dreaming to bring it in, because I think there's a lot of stuff that, if twisted or seasoned right, can easily slot into the theme of the 5th edition system, and it makes sense to me that hybridizing the two would sell quite well.
Nice. So before we get into the plugs themselves for each of you individually, I want to talk about this charity event that you guys are sponsoring that you had made special mention of. The Power Word Resist Charity Variety Show, and you've got the poster there on screen right now, is being sponsored by City of Glass Games as well as many, many other sponsors. I'd like you guys to talk about this for a minute, just so that we can promote it to everybody who's viewing right now, as well as anybody who's watching on demand. This is happening around GenCon, if I understand correctly, based off of the date there, July 30th, out in Indiana. So talk about this. What's the deal with this? What's going on here? And let's promote this.
So for the major point, this has been a creation of primarily myself, Sarah of Blank Bodies, Cal, who's another community member, M, who's our social media, Madness Diamond, who may have been featured on here before, I'm not sure, but they are big in the space of sex worker decriminalization as well. We want to put together something that, in the trying times that we currently exist in, that was doing some real good. Last year, we did a charity event benefiting World Central Kitchen that was much smaller. Now we've had a full year to really build it out. So the details. We are going to be hosting this in the Indie Repertory Historic Theater that is literally on Washington Street. If you go to Gen Con, it is in that weird space that sits between the Conrad and the Hyatt Regency. It's that small theater. Sorry, not small. It's that theater that is right there on ground level that most people don't pay attention to or see. It'll be happening between the hours of 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. We'll be opening doors at 6:30 p.m. Our acts involve the bands of local Indiana bands, Mr. Clit and the Pink Cigarettes, Sonora, and Moon Goons. Sonora was with us last year for our charity event as well. These are a combination of BIPOC, trans, queer, and other individuals within those bands, so we make sure we make it as diverse as possible. We are also featuring Juicy Garland, who within the World of Darkness space, and specifically also big in Delta Green, is a prominent drag queen performer. They may also be bringing some friends along to make that a little enhanced. And lastly, our headlining act is well known in the space nerd comedian, performer, actor, storyteller in his own right, Ify Wadiway. And that was really the biggest get of anything. Like, if I could work with a single person, that was really my big fish try get. He is on board. This event is going to benefit RAIN, which is the largest international and global sexual, domestic, and other assault survivor abuse recovery network. They've been around for a long time, and they assist in the areas of recovering from sex trafficking, recovering from violence of any sort, and make sure people get resources, as well as recovery efforts to get people back. As well as Gender Nexus, which is a local sorry, my browser's screwing up on me for a little bit. Give it a second. Great time for that. As well as Gender Nexus, which is a local Indiana-based queer organization that is there to offer resources to queer individuals, and really individuals across any spectrum, that offers support to Trans Lifeline, Trevor Project, any other resource that exists in that queer space. You can find more on their website, gendernexus.org. We will also, as part of this, first, the venue is a 600-person venue. It will have disability accessibility. There's at least 8 or 9 seats for that. Our baseline price for our ticket right now, we are looking at $25 per ticket, and we will have the first 3 rows as premium sitting. That will be about $40 each, plus a minor processing fee, because we got to make sure that we're not taking a bath on this. We will also have a silent charity auction that occurs at the same time across various different lots. We are planning to have 6 lots that include sponsorship from Renegade Game Studio, Paizo, Modifius, Monty Cook Games, Gehenna Gaming. We're also working on Free League Publishing. We're working on Asmodee and a slew of others to build these lots. To also, every fund that goes into those goes directly to these 2 charities. As said, please come out to it. It's going to be a great time. We're going to make sure that there's a lot of stuff there for a lot of people. And if it gets big enough, we might have a special secret prize too.
Amazing.
Oh, and also it's occurring the Wednesday just before the start of GenCon. So July 30th is literally the day before.
Wednesday, just before the start of Gen Con. So if you're making plans, if you have not already gotten your tickets to fly out to Gen Con, get there a day earlier than the start of Gen Con so you can make sure to attend that event, because it sounds like a must-see thing to go to. Fantastic. So, gentlemen, before we say goodnight, before we say goodbye to these wonderful viewers who have stuck with us for this incredible record-setting interview, as this has been the longest After Dark interview, but also super engaging. I agree with you when I say it seems like it's only been an hour. Like, I'm surprised at how quickly the time went by. Let's go ahead and give some plugs for each and every one of you. Arden, go ahead and start with you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having us. You can find me on pretty much every social media at Arden13. That's Arden XIII. You can also find me on YouTube for the Lotus Media YouTube channel. We might be going through a little bit of a name change here soon, but if you type up Lotus Media on YouTube, scroll a little bit, because there's a new pastry channel with the same name, and I was like, that's not going to help us. But we're there. I do a lot of different nerdy based content, and recently getting into some wargaming stuff as well.
Collin.
Oh no, I'm a ghost. I'm just on Discord. I got nothing else.
You can find him on the City of Glass server. Join the server. That's where you find this man.
There you go. Go
or
find
in the
us.
wild in person, probably.
Erik.
You can find me at a variety of events either through City of Glass. As mentioned, we have over 200 events at Gen Con this year across various workshops, live plays, seminars, and other forms of media and gaming. You can also find me at, this is going to be a list, PAX East, which is this upcoming week, where we are demoing all of our games through Gehenna Gaming of Call to Power, Eldritch Automata, Horror D&D, which is the Black Ballad, the Red Opera, and Festival of Forgotten, which just got funded on BackerKit, as well as Sunset, which is a game that was created by one of the writers of V5. As well as Call to Power, which I mentioned earlier, which is a sort of like mix of Jujutsu Kaisen and Dark Souls, is the best way to explain that in like a reincarnation mechanic. We will also be at Anime Central in Chicago when that comes up. We will be at UK Games Expo. Origins, we will have a booth at. We will be at PAX West, New York Comic Con, PAX Unplugged, and probably a few. Oh, and QuestCon in Florida in September, when all those happen. You can find me on social media at Sleipnir. So think about Odin's horse, Sleipnir, but bastardize the name a little bit, swap a letter, Sleiphnir. And we will also be releasing a live play of Eldritch Automata called Violence Against Nature that is going to be released as soon as I finally learn how to video edit. We are also featuring Our Brilliant Ruin, which was created by written by Justin Achille.
Yes, friend of the show, Justin Achille, as well as Rachel Wilkinson too.
Correct.
And Brent, go for it.
So I do a podcast called On the Origin of Battle Mechs. If you like giant stompy robots set in a Game of Thrones in space sort of universe, we go over the each of the machines on an episode. So if you want to learn all about one specific machine, you listen to that episode. We got a Discord. We're pretty much everywhere. We're on YouTube, on all the podcast platforms that I am aware of, at least. I'm also on TikTok under Ouroboros of Old, Ouroboros spelt with the U. And I also do paid STing on Start Playing Games, profile is Ouroboros as well. I got a couple listings up there for like a Hakata game. I got a couple seats left in my Werewolf the Apocalypse game, all 5th edition, and been doing that for how long now? At least 6 months. So having a table run that long, that's a milestone, right? I keep telling
Absolutely,
myself that, right?
it is. It is
Congrats,
100%.
congrats. Yeah, absolutely.
Anything over like 6 weeks, I think, is a milestone. Most games don't make it past that, I would say. So that's incredible.
I have passed through the crucible.
You have. You have. Of course, go follow City of Glass Games on Blue Sky, and you can find them on Facebook, I believe was the other place you guys said you were. And yeah, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Go follow St. Pete by Night also on all those social medias you see up above, and in the description down below. And you can join our community on Discord by following that Discord link. We would love to have you. But for these incredible guests, I'm Kent. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned on our channel, but because we have Rage Across Tampa coming up this Tuesday, and then we have Hellhounds on Friday over on YouTube. So go check those shows out. But thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.